All right, we are live. Today is January 13th, 2026. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my YouTube channel and monitor the comments there. So if you want a blue wrench, just speak up and I will hand them out. Today we talked about the 33 stitches, the hoax code. And I just finished uploading the conversation last night with fakeologist Kurt Cobain on the fake show, the fakeologist Monday night show. And then I put up a 48-minute video, Be Good, TDS, and Endless Night Predictive Programming. So Endless Night is the Netflix version of that fire in the Alps that happened on New Year's. To a T, if you've seen the trailer. I mean, it opens up with the sparkler setting the ceiling on fire. Again, just what we expect. We're on Planet Netflix. Although we make the distinction here that life does not follow Netflix. Fake events do. And the fake events aren't real life. But there is a concurrent timeline with the one that we're living on. And it consists of fake events that are superimposed onto this timeline. Sort of like how spies have fake backstories and they're plugged into the lives of normal people and they blend in. The fake events blend in with the real world in what we would describe as a hyper reality. And if you don't make the distinction between the two as you process media, you're in it. You're in the hyper reality. You're in the subjective universe. Welcome to Planet Netflix. I was just checking out an auto hoaxer I didn't know about. I went to peggyhall.substack after seeing her breakdown of the ICE shooting on her YouTube channel. And she has this thing, she calls them payops. And I often say I spell psyop with a $sign. But anyway, it's the first I've heard of her, so I've recommended her to Substack subscribers. And she does have an article, How and Why I Exposed the PSYOPs. Somebody's got to do it. A lot of interesting insights. I was just listening to her breakdown of the ICE shooting and then also, the 33 thing with the stitches. And we seem to agree on the point that we're looking at a calling card. We don't even have to get all esoteric and try to figure out the meaning of it. But there are patterns, and she's pointing out tells, what we call hoax indicators. Same thing. The tells. What are the tells? What are the hallmarks of hoaxery, the hoax indicators? We've had to invent an entire lexicon to explain this concept, or all these concepts, because they're so novel. And the words that we would normally use that are definitionally correct, like the right definitions, like fake, for example, yeah, that's not really a word you can use anymore because it's been co-opted. And this really started with Trump. Even the word psyop, nobody knew what a psyop was. Nobody knew what a squib was 2 years ago. And then about a year and a half ago, I hear Joe Rogan say, what's a psyop? And somebody breaks it down for him. And then the Pentagon's like, no, Taylor Swift is not a psyop. So now everybody knows, well, that psyops exist. But the term has been stripped of any real objective meaning. It's kind of vague. It's just a synonym for fake now, I guess. Or even hoax. But anyway, these terms aren't even, I don't think, all-encompassing enough to explain what we're looking at, because we're not looking at individual events. They're part of a bigger story. But regardless, we've had to come up with words to outpace their stripping the definition away from the words that we would normally use. So they took fake from us. They took psyop from us. So now what? And what word do we use? We can't even use hoax. Weirdly, they call the people who call out the hoaxes hoaxers. So when she says these are tells, I'm like, yep, exactly. We're seeing patterns. And if they tell you that you're not seeing a pattern, if they tell you that your senses are not to be trusted. Like, oh, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe what we're telling you. You're being gaslit. Our whole society is gaslit. Now, one of the things she brought up on the ICE shooting is the name Nick. I didn't even think about this. Other Nick. We got Nick Shirley. So Nick Shirley's been on the scene in the vicinity. He's been part of this whole story rolling out regarding Somalis. So he was also on the Charlie Kirk podcast on September 10th, the day of the shooting, talking about gun violence. And then we have Nick Maduro, and then there was Nick Reiner, the one who slashed his parents to death, supposedly. We talked about that one and the connections between it and the Frankenstein's monster. Shout out to Synchro. By the way, Synchro found something else today that is, or maybe last night, but it has to do with this actor who's on the run, accused of terrible things, and some fascinating connections to Minneapolis. And he also noticed that on the new Steven Spielberg Day of Disclosure movie, the trailer seems to emphasize Minneapolis. And it all points to this hive mind, and we're seeing the mobs coming up. So there's something to it. Renee Nicole Good. And we've been talking about the significance of the name Good as it relates to Wicked Part 2, which I will go, if you haven't seen it, if you don't want to see it, if you don't care to, I get it. But I will do it as homework. This is research for me. So any kind of movies that we think are relevant to our discussions, I'll take one for the team, for the tank. I even went to go see Barbie for the tank. What's up, Frank Murr, 33 NDB, P. Trippa, Mike Lito. Fisherman says, what you doing? Doing the same thing we do every night. Trying to deconstruct the world stage. And we are getting to the point where we can start setting a date. When are we going to begin the great deconstruction? I mean, I don't really have a particular time frame for it, but I'm thinking maybe we should establish one, the starting date, and organize it. How to get involved. So everyone's already involved just by being part of this conversation, all these discussions. You're already part of the great deconstruction, but we're about to formalize it in a published format. PDFs on a website, something like a wiki breakdown, but even simpler. Like, it's really got to be simple enough. And we're taking something very complex, but we have to break it down in terms of the concept where we can really explain what parallel media means. So every major hoax or fake person, simulated event, the things that we consider to be the staged events that make up our contrived, curated history, this version of reality that we live in, specifically the major myths, the major miracles and martyrs of this Truman Show reality. We want all of them on a timeline going back to the last 100 years. So before even JFK, but including that. And so we're going to have 3 columns: the mainstream, the alternative, and then this third perspective. And the third perspective is the one that includes the concept of the twin timelines, the real and the fake, and how they merge through psyops in the media and become part of this composite reality that we all live in, where fake is perfectly fused with real. In fact, fake dominates and rules the real. I was just posting about this in Discord, how fake or not, and I'm going with fake, this event that kicked off this drama starting in Minneapolis, it does in fact set off this reaction, this chain reaction, where I watched some activist get his eye shot out by I guess a non-lethal round or something. I mean, people really do throw themselves in the paths of cars. We see environmentalists, lying on the ground. A lot of people do get caught up in this, and I refer to them as mainstream media fundamentalists, because the MSM is the church of the one world order. It is the way that they synchronize supposedly 8 billion people into a singular worldview, where we can all be simultaneously triggered, activated, made to respond to something, but we're all programmed at the same time. This is a universal program. So it has replaced and supplanted religions. And I happen to think it's an extension. I think it's the new iteration. And they've just brought back all of the concepts from the traditional religions, all the same bad ideas, but now syncretized with science fiction. Sprightly Sprite says, great deconstruction would make a great mural. Yeah, well, the reason why we have to do this is there's a lot of competent auto hoaxers out there, like I just mentioned, Peggy Hall. There's fakeologists. There's a lot of people in media analysis, media fakery breakdown, JLB, for example, just a handful here that I'm bringing up. But I think what really is the next phase of this whole thing is recognizing the continuity of fake events, not just news bending, but history bending. And I think we all need to get on the same sheet with regard to this, but it's not going to happen unless people can see the big picture. Like, where does this lead? We're not real time, kind of just going with the flow, reacting to everything that the news does. There's actually a bigger picture here. The bigger picture is a paradigm shift. And it shouldn't really be that difficult to make this step out of, 1 foot on the world stage, 1 foot off. It won't work anymore. It's time to step off of it altogether. The whole thing, the whole institution is entrained with fiction, entrained with mainstream programming, which alone tells you that the whole thing is rigged. You can't fight against the info war. You really have to step out of it. Level Heading says hello from Normieville. Yeah. Normieville, Trutherville, and Woketown. Those are the major subdivisions of the world stage. Where we are is off-world stage. We're not even acknowledged. They don't censor what we do. That's why I don't care what they do in terms of censoring, in terms of blocking, like, oh, you need an internet ID or whatever to have ideas. Like, whatever they do, it's only going to affect the controlled opposition and their followers. It's not going to reach us. What we're doing is way too toxic for any of the people in alt media to even confront. It's outside of their particular worldviews, which they're defending. Even if they're knowingly just essentially engaging in polemics for an ideology they don't even believe in, they're not really fully apprised of how fake everything is. That's a big secret. Auto Hoaxer says, your presumption that MSM influencers aren't all totally in on the script is absurdly unthought out. No, I don't think, okay, for example, people will say, well, there's no way they faked the moon landing because there were 400,000 contractors. No way 400,000 people could keep a secret. I'm like, yeah, there's no way. No way 400,000 can. But there's no reason to presume that every single one of those contractors was aware that Neil Armstrong was faking it. No, it's called compartmentalization. It's hierarchical. There are security clearances. There are NDAs. Things are limited on a need-to-know basis. Like, I was in the military, we had security clearances. I was not aware of what the people who were operating the air defense artillery were doing. I just had my specific compartment to work within. I was not allowed to go to certain places and times, at certain times, because these things were classified. So to think that everybody who's participating gets full access to the full unclassified version, that wouldn't work. Loose lips sink ships. You wonder why aren't there any whistleblowers? It's because they don't know what's going on. The programmers are mostly programmed. The only ones who would be fully apprised of the totality of it all, the scope of this thing, would be those involved in it directly. And we can name names. That's what makes this important. By expanding on the concept of predictive programming, concurrent programming, and showing the connections between multiple movies attributed to each director and how these reflect in the psyops, as we've gone through the details here and kind of systematized it, we've revealed that it's no longer a mystery. For like 20 plus years, truthers have been like, it's the simulation. These are all coincidences. There's no pattern here. there's been this denialism about it, but no, there's no denying it now. There is a pattern. It's systemic, and we can point out by name participants in the psyops, people in government, people in law enforcement, people in entertainment. And to me, that's a dangerous proposition that they probably didn't want getting out. And that's why there's always been this concerted effort to get us to not discuss this aspect of it. So the concept of metascriptors is what I'm describing here. Mouse Cat says, I don't think penguins would fight wars in tanks unless you can get them to eat a fish substitute. They will not travel or keep well in this battlefield environment. Here's your wrench. You know, I have a script for Penguinati. And the whole premise of it is these aren't just regular penguins. These are penguins who have been eating nootropics, smart drugs, and they have Neuralink. So we're talking about penguins that have crossed the singularity before we have. You know, the idea of the singularity, is it John von Neumann, like new man? The singularity where we take over our evolution from Mother Nature because we become so technologically advanced. The idea of the Penguinati is they got there first. They got access to smart drugs at some Antarctica base that was abandoned. And several generations later, they're smarter than us. And so the idea that they would be, you know, building war machines, I don't think it's that far-fetched. All right, let's continue here. Otto Hoax says, you can't be a famous influencer without being in on the script. Otherwise, there's dread of the influencer waking up and going rogue. You know, some of these people are, I think, in it to a higher level than others. For example, Candace Owens would necessarily have to know that Charlie Kirk's still alive. But I don't think Tim Pool knows that. I don't think Stu Peters knows that. I don't think Ian Carroll knows that. I think there's a level here that you have to get to be in the know. And it has to be, I think, relevant to your specific field of expertise. I don't think they would want to know stuff that doesn't pertain to them. That would make them a potential leak. Like, think about it like mind viruses and dangerous ideas they want to quarantine. These would be kept under quarantine. You wouldn't just let these ideas flow around randomly. This whole system is about mind control, compartmentalization. And I think the compartmentalization would be even prevalent among the programmed. Some of these people that we're talking about, again, would be let in because they have to. Others would be kind of in a blind spot. Like, for example, Ye. So Ye was there with Candace Owens when they started White Lives Matter, right after she had married the CEO of Parler. And Parler was instrumental in organizing J6. It was a huge honeypot. You had to put your driver's license up. You had to upload your driver's license to get on that Parler. And I did it for research purposes. But then Apple pulled its servers. It was taken down. And if you remember at the time of Parler becoming the new Twitter, there was a racist mass shooter killing massage therapists at various places around Georgia. And they called him the Parler shooter. But anyway, I was just bringing that up because it was just interesting. You have the Parler shooter as Parler's going down, and Parler's being demonized as a hotbed of racism and extremism. But anyway, Candace Owens was 33 at the time. I remember saying at that time, okay, she's some kind of an agitator and she's connected with this whole thing. And I was looking at her book, Blackout. And then White Lives Matter, obviously, came back. It came to life after that girl in the subway was stabbed this summer. But they've been trying to jumpstart that for some time. So I'm looking at it as, okay, well, she's obviously more in the know, I would say, than Ye. Because I've looked at his behavior since, his opinion since. And I think Ye exists in a Truman Show. I think he's probably got handlers. I think when the Uvalde shooting happened, he talked about this echo chamber and how wherever you go, you're going to hear about the event. Like, I think he's somehow figuring things out, but I don't think that he's fully in the know. And that's just based on his own statements. Nick Fuentes, I don't think he knows either. Like, I think Nick Fuentes has not like a word for word script, but he has a persona and he has points to defend. And it's really not hard to put yourself in an echo chamber and defend the same key points again and again. But how would it benefit the PSYOP entertainment complex to let them know that moon landings are fake? He scoffs at these things, whereas Candace Owens believes these things to be fake. I don't know. It's a matter of debate. But what we can do is we can point to individuals who have lost their plausible deniability with regard to their involvement in, for example, movies that pertain to psyops that have predictive programming. You're like, well, this director is consistently represented, or this author. We were just talking about Tom Clancy and how we're now living through a Jack Ryan. Yeah, well, what I'm saying here is like, what do you expect? There's some kind of so Auto Hoaxer GTFO seems to contend here that every influencer is fully apprised of the level of fakery, and I just don't see how that would make sense. It would seem to be a very sloppy way of organizing, especially if you don't want defectors and whistleblowers. Would you literally let everybody in on the deepest secrets? I don't think so. When would they tell them? What would be the context? I mean, it's an interesting idea, but see, what I'm trying to get away from here is the premise that we have a two-tiered society where all of the programmers are fully in on the big conspiracy, like some um, separate class, like philosopher kings, and that we're just these dumb sheeple being ruled over, and that all these people that we're talking to on the internet, these people we're interacting with, like Candace Owens and stuff, that they're all somehow part of this plot. And I kind of don't think it works that way. I think it's more likely that, like for example, David Hogg, crisis actor. Are we to believe that he's fully into this whole thing? That he's fully apprised of media fakery and scripted history? I don't know. I don't know how they would arrive at that conclusion. How did you arrive at it? Would you have arrived at this conclusion that our history is totally scripted, that it's proactively created, that our timeline is fused with fake events bending our news and our history? Like, this isn't really a popular idea. Not even like for example, do you think Alex Jones is aware of the level of fakery? Well, I think of all the conspiracy theorists out there, he's most likely the most in the know, just because he's been in J6. Um, Speaking of J6, January Sixers, you got Owen Schroyer. He supposedly went to jail. I don't think any of these J6ers really went to jail. Ashley Babbitt's not dead. So these are individuals who know that they're creating major historic events. TPUSA. Anybody working around TPSA, those guys who handled Charlie Kirk's squibbed body, obviously in the know. And that gets kind of interesting when you look at TPUSA's connection to the Temple of Set and from from PSYOPs to Mind War. Because the whole book, the whole ebook, the paper on PSYOP to Mind War is about transitioning from physical destructive war with real deaths to fake deaths, fake destruction, from going to real war to culture war. In other words, mind war becoming the dominant way of managing society, which, for reasons they explain, is more humane and makes more sense economically, and still arrives at a conclusion that is satisfactory. They solve these problems without them really becoming problems. I think it's interesting, again, that one of the chairpersons of TPUSA was in charge of that book being produced. He had the, not Satanist, but Setian, Temple of Set. He had Colonel Michael Aquino write that thing. Level-headed says, Netflix is a fermentation of thoughts. I happen to think that we're at a good place in terms of entertainment. Like, I really don't have a problem with the quality of entertainment. In fact, I think it's pretty impressive all around. Yeah, Auto Hoaxer, I do agree with you. It's a big club, as Carlin said. But I'm saying it would be dumb It'd be literally strategically foolish to not have the information stratified. It would be ridiculous. It's like I said, with the military, you have to have security clearances. And the reason why is that, yeah, maybe people can keep secrets, but they can if they're being tortured. And they're not a security threat if they don't have that information. Copacetic says, Kenosha was a game changer. They used live stream influencers in a closed movie set. They were in on it, signed NDAs for sure. Huge debate in the think tank with most saying it was real. Yeah, well, the thing with Kenosha, too, is all of those live streamers were working for Tucker Carlson. And the entire time they were drones, FBI drones, monitoring the situation. You know, my take on it is when it was a closed movie set, it had to be a closed movie set. And we don't know if the specific shot that we saw where Gage Krauts became Gage Grossarm, we don't know if that was recorded in advance. But you can't just at some of these things. I mean, you can, but when someone says, "Oh, that's obviously fake," it looks fake. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't understand where you're coming from with this, because there's a point where the special effects are indistinguishable from the real thing unless you have a basis for comparison. So just saying it looks fake isn't good enough. What we have to do is look at the wider context. Angst G says, is Nick Shirley legit? No. He was on the Charlie Kirk podcast talking about gun violence while Charlie was getting shot. Again, I brought him up because the name Nick Shirley, Nick Maduro, Nick Reiner, Renee, Nick Cole Good. What's with that? Okay, my final response to Auto Hoaxer GTFO regarding this idea that they're all in the know, I'm just asking, what sense would it make? If you're talking about PsyWar, psychological warfare, and operatives, we're talking about secrecy. Like when you're talking about the Charlie Kirk thing, the more people that know, the more likely the truth is going to leak. So what would be the benefit of not keeping secrets internally? Like, why wouldn't they have that information compartmentalized? It wouldn't make sense. It'd be, like I'm saying, I think it'd be really foolish. I mean, I don't even know if that's an idea worth even spending time on. And as far as I can tell, the system is very compartmentalized for its own. I mean, it's built on ignorance, levels of ignorance. But I think that they're given a false sense of enlightenment. Like, you're in the know, you're in the club. Yeah, sure, you're in the club, but are you sure you're at the top of it? Are you necessarily privy to everything? You know, for example, anybody can go join a fraternity. You can join the Masons, and you can be, let in on all these supposed secrets, which aren't even secret. They're all published. But does that mean that you're fully apprised of everything the organization's a part of and what it does? Well, no, that's not how these. It's not how any big organization works. Like I said with the moon landing, is your argument that all 400,000 contractors knew it was going to be faked? Like, would that make any sense? Well, obviously it would not. I first encountered that argument. I saw some clip. It was Bill O'Reilly was talking to a 9/11 truther, and he said something like, there are way too many people. They would all have to know. Like, he was just trying to explain how you couldn't have this conspiracy theory because somebody would have told about it. Like, oh, it's too big of a secret to keep. And so that argument has often been used to refute conspiracy theories. It's too big of a secret, someone would have talked. And I'm saying, well, compartmentalization is what explains that process, how you prevent a lot of people from having the full story. I mean, in other words, if you have no compartmentalization, you have no secrecy, you couldn't possibly pull this off. Yeah, exactly, Lean Dion. In secret societies, lower levels are used for utility and misinformed. And it's just, like I said, at the military, I had no idea what was going on with the air defense artillery, what their capacity was, how far they could, what their range was. A lot of things just weren't talked about at outside of the little compartments, and that's for very specific reasons. You have security clearances, and I knew people who lost security clearances for things that they did off base. And so what this does is it protects. It's like a layer of protection. The misinformation, the uninformed, the ignorance, that's how they maintain the integrity of the system. But if you can provide for me an example of an organization that didn't have any kind of mechanism for keeping its trade secrets secret, please let me know. I do get the sense here that some of these celebrities who play predictive programming roles are quite aware. Like that could be an enticement. If you tell an actor, hey, do you want to be involved in using your skill, using your art to help create history itself? We're making history. Like that's kind of an achievement if you think about it. It might even be a status symbol to go from Hollywood A-lister to crisis actor. Like you're getting in on something. I kind of get that idea. I got that idea during the 2020 thing when Cardi B called it Corona hoax and it went viral. And then the next thing you know, she says something about you guys are all getting paid, referring to some NBA players. So if you're getting paid, I'm getting paid. I want in on it. And then suddenly she shuts up about Corona hoax. And next thing you know, she's investing into the home tests, and PPE or something. I'm like, wow. Piano Dante says, why is it always the FM or Jews targeted? Why not talk about the Vatican and Hidden Templars? Yeah, I don't have any reason to pursue any of those, like these whodunit stories. Like, oh, this was done by the Jesuits. This was done by the reptilians. This was done by the Masons. Like, no, but if you want to be honest about it, show me who has their fingerprints all over every single psyop. Show me where and you say Templars. Well, Templars are a Masonic thing. Skull and Bones is a Templar offshoot. But what I'm saying here is that we're not like suggesting necessarily that Freemasons are behind all this stuff in terms of the fake events and the psyops. But a couple of points about it is, one, there is the obvious signature on all these events that does correlate with that body of symbolism. But you also have the structure itself, the secret society structure. And to me, it makes perfect sense because you have the initiates who are shown the light, which means they're brought into the temple with a wool sack over their head, which means like the wool over your eyes. They're hoodwinked. And they have a rope around their neck and they're walked around the temple and they don't know what's going on. I mean, they're blindfolded basically. But the whole point of it is to say that we brought somebody in from the darkness because the world outside the temple is in darkness. And then they say, you swear this oath, you promise not to tell, you're in. And then they pull the hood off and then they see the light. And now they're part of the club. And what they swear in the oath is to never reveal in any way. And they're very specific. You can't repeat it. You can't write it down. You can't print it. You can't carve it. You can't in any way make it intelligible to anybody that hasn't been approved to receive the information. So this is like the original NDA, the blood oaths. So the blood oaths are to do what though? It's to keep the light from getting out. And so if you look at it from that perspective, what the Masonic system is really about is having this enlightened elite, and then you have the endarkened masses. And I would argue here that the new hoodwink is the screen, the black screen, the black monolith, that the masses live in darkness. This is undeniable. If they believe all the fake events, if they believe all the psyops and they believe the fake news and they can't tell real from fake, then they live in ignorance. That's what darkness symbolizes. Darkness is ignorance, light is awareness. And so they're not in the know. Light is knowledge. So we are in the know about the fake events. We kind of took off the hoodwink. We pulled the wool off our face, off our head, pulled the sack off of our heads and saw the light, which we're not entitled to because we didn't sign the NDAs. But the structure there is what I'm talking about. That's kind of what we're talking about, the idea of an enlightened minority ruling over an endarkened majority. But I'm not saying that Masons are, again, to me, that the only point of it is that when, and we do this a lot, when we look at these fake events, you do find symbolism. And where does the symbolism originate from? Well, you find Masonic stuff, you find Templar stuff, you find OTO, which is Order Templar Orientis, neo-Gnostic stuff, Super Bowls, pagan. You got a lot of pagan stuff. With NASA, there's quite a lot of, and I was watching some YouTube video where someone else, not even in this area, was talking about Tantra, sacred sex, and got into the subject of the night sky being the goddess, and that the rocket is like the symbol of Kundalini and the ascension of consciousness, and that essentially it's this occult pageantry when they're doing the space travel. And I've been saying that for some time. So I'm just, what I'm pointing out here is that it's not strictly Masonic. I mean, I would call NASA an Egyptian mystery school. And of course, the Freemasonic stuff does kind of harken back to Egypt for all of its symbols. They have the obelisk and stuff, which is Osiris. But they're kind of eclectic, especially if you look at the Scottish Rite. They're not really the culprits, though. Like, it's not like this group runs the world. That's not what we're asserting here. I'm saying that there's symbolism dispersed throughout the entire field of entertainment and fake news that's consistent, but it is certainly consisting of multiple sources. And like, again, the Masonic stuff is just some of the most obvious, and it could be in a lot of ways that these things are intentional misdirection. Could easily be that, but my best guess is that 33, aside from the esoteric interpretations of it, is some kind of a calling card. If I was an insider and I saw a newspaper, I would be able to know which event was fake just based on the code. Oh, we caught the shooter, Tyler Robinson, at 33 hours. JD Vance comes out. Oh, the guy that shot her was triggered because he just got hit by another car and had 33 stitches. You see this stuff so often that, like, okay, it seems to be hoax code. And that does pertain to the 33rd degree, which is the highest rank, and it refers to the motto, I think, which is order out of chaos. And order out of chaos refers to the problem reaction solution formula of creating a scene, getting a reaction, and then supplying a solution that you wanted to implement in advance. Marcel says, we're breaking it down. They have been seen. The veil has been lifted. Yeah, exactly. So the new veil is the monolith, the black mirror. And the reason I refer to it as the monolith goes back to Kubrick 2001 Space Odyssey, where the symbol of the monolith is beneath the sun and the moon conjoining. And the connection is made that the monolith relates to this movie screen. And the sun and the moon would represent real and fake, the objective and the dream world, or the fantasy, the fiction and the news. And the merging of the two. And there's a story within Space Odyssey about man taking this journey through space. In the books to Saturn. But the idea is becoming a star child by merging with the monolith. Well, what does that even mean? And there's, deep symbolism in the movie. A lot of it's just, you're just looking at it. There's not a lot of narration to explain it. But what I'm thinking here is that Space Odyssey is about our collective journey into the space age. And the space age isn't about going to Saturn or Jupiter or Mars or the moon. The space age is about the inner space, our collective inner space, being processed through the monolith, through the one perspective. And this perspective is the one you get when you merge real and fake, solar, lunar, the eclipse symbol. And that's where we are. We've been there. We've all been processed, initiated into the new age. And what the symbolism of 9/11 had to do with, and this was brought up by Chartword, and ever since I've been talking about his stuff, he pulled it down, but I saved it all. He did these excellent breakdowns. So he suggested that the event of 9/11 was directed by Stanley Kubrick and foreshadowed in 2001 Space Odyssey. Well, interestingly enough, looking over Ground Zero was the monolith Hilton, which is specifically related to 2001 Space Odyssey. But there is a scene in 2001 Space Odyssey where they're unveiling a monolith that looks like Ground Zero. So 2001 Space Odyssey seems to be the unveiling of the monolith, the merging of the two ritually performed. So two towers became one. And overlooking it is this black monolith. But his interpretation of it was that this event was part of this process of moving us into a single worldview. And if you think about it, what do psyops do but synchronize large groups of people? Sort of like religions synchronize minds into singular worldviews. The myths, the miracles, the big events, the miracles in particular would be things that bind people into this belief system. So like landing on the moon, you could consider to be a miracle. All mankind, a big leap for all mankind. We all experienced that. And now we all live in the world in which we just landed on the moon. So that's a very unifying thing. 9/11, also very unifying thing. And both of these have Kubrick's handprints all over them. But what I'm saying is these big transformative psyops, these major historic events are being faked for the purposes of processing us into the singular worldview. It's like a new monotheism. Marcel says, oh, thank you. Yeah, he posted 5, I guess there's 5 new members. Again, comment if you want a wrench, and also comment. So if somebody gives out memberships, which is a way to support the channel, you can receive those. And everything is behind it's a small paywall. I mean, everything's for members now in terms of the content after it's live. So you can get it on Patreon, Substack, or Spotify. It's like $2 a month on Spotify. Just go to ips.monster. And if you go to ips.monster, you could just listen to the replays. And I'm just making this adjustment for the year. Everything prior to that is still 100% free, etc. But, we're kind of concentrating on this new objective. And we really need to remain focused. And our focus right now is the great deconstruction. And those who are deeply involved aren't going to miss anything anyway. But it's important that we keep this thing going, and that's why I have to kind of monetize things. It's just because of where we are. But I think things will improve. I think there's something here. There's something that will emerge out of this in terms of maybe a minor marketplace disruption. Because this entire time that any of us have been paying attention, the only place to go if you have any kind of opposition to mainstream thought is Trutherville, which is nothing but honeypots, cul-de-sacs, and dead ends. A lot of attention has gone there and still goes there, and a lot of money goes there. And these things are somewhat synonymous. So what will happen as this third perspective expands, as the off-world stage gains traction, is a lot of that misdirected time and attention will be directed here into a separate economy, which will be supportive of those content creators who aren't still adhering to alt media orthodoxies. Because alt media is just as establishment as mainstream media. We've already established this. Michael Lito said it would be intentional misdirection if 33 was exoteric. Since it's not, it can't be. Well, there's also this thing of where we see often the limited hangout thing, where certain real things are leaked, like intentionally by operatives, so they can find out who's paying attention. So now they have a list of everyone who has that particular mind virus, so they can quarantine it, so they can control it. So a limited hangout refers to a leak, an intentional leak. So let's say 33 was such a thing. Well, let's try to figure out who is noticing the fake news, and let's plant some clues. So we get the clues. Now, where do the clues lead us? Illuminati. Now we look crazy because we're like, yeah, the Illuminati faked it. Now we've been discredited. We look crazy. And all because we were right. Our intuition was correct. We correctly intuited there was a conspiracy, but we took the bait and we went down some mystical explanation. And we see a lot of this stuff. So if you notice patterns in the news correlating with the movies, well, generally people were led to the conclusion that you live in a simulation. Well, that left a lot of people, I think, kind of nullified. Like they're no longer on the path to truth because they've accepted this ridiculous premise that we're in a simulation. So their accurate perceptions, their noticing of patterns was misdirected into an explanation that just nullified them as observers. So now they're like, oh, well, the news is fake. Wait a minute. No, reality's fake. And we've seen this a lot of times. So I'm suggesting here that a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, if it's there, we're probably meant to see it. It's a dual purpose. So it lets those in the know, and it lets those who aren't supposed to be in the know get accounted for. They get caught up in this little honeypot. They get caught up in Trutherville. I mean, what they do is they take your intuition and your perception and they turn it against you. It's like, yeah, we're lying, and some people will see through the lies. So let's have a second layer of lies. And that's where you get alternative media. Totally accounted for, totally scripted, totally predictable. And one great example of how controlled it is simply look at how the anti-establishment views the Charlie Kirk thing. Erica Kirk did it. Charlie Kirk is a victim of his wife working with Israel or South Korea or the Moonies or whoever. And now she's, taking over the organization and she's going to become vice president. So that kind of conspiracy theory is standard. All of the truthers are lockstep. Yeah, the mainstream's lying. Mainstream Republicans are lying. There was a conspiracy. But zero of those individuals, zero influencers, no channels of note are saying Charlie Kirk's not dead. That's control. That's compartmentalization. You're telling me that out of all of the alternative thinkers, out of all the conspiracy theorists who go down these wild rabbit holes, none of them are able to say Charlie Kirk's not dead? None of them. And it's because they're put in these platforms, in these positions, and they're not allowed to put that particular idea out to their large audiences and give it credibility. They bury it. And this is uniform. So if you need any more evidence, if you're looking for evidence that the alternative media is establishment, that's it right there for you. King Ravana says, thanks for broadcasting IPS Moon Family we talked about in August. Yeah, okay, the Moon Family. So there's a couple of things. The cult of Sung Young Moon, if you're familiar with the Moonies, his son has that Church of the AR-15. It's like a MAGA church where they have a cross made of AR-15s and they bring guns to church. That cult. Well, anyway, according to Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk went to South Korea to hook up with the Moonies, and he refused their multi-billion-dollar deal, and they killed him. And this is interesting because the Tempest series is in South Korea. And the Charlie Kirk character who gets killed in episode 1 was speaking to this youth Republican group. Well, Charlie Kirk in real life was there 4 days before it aired, speaking to the same group, the real version of the group. So you have this perfect merging of a real character and a fake character on the world stage. But that brings South Korea into it. And from the beginning, I thought, why is this predictive programming for an American psyop broadcast in a South Korean spy thriller? Well, Candace Owens just brought it all full circle. Otto Hoaxer says, isn't your security clearance conclusion limiting the world stager's paradigm to your personalized military lifestyle, Plato's cave imagination? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, in my experience, human beings are really bad at keeping secrets. That you have non-disclosure agreements for a reason. Do you think that you could have any big corporation operate without non-disclosure agreements if you're dealing with like intellectual property, or maybe you're making movies? Like, for example, Marvel Comic Universe. People are working on movies, films, and they're sharing scripts. Do you think that we could just rely on people being honest and not running their mouths and not have agreements and contracts and NDAs? I just don't think that's realistic. I mean, are we not talking about secrecy? We're talking about events that are outside of the public's view, where the news media is integrating with law enforcement and Department of Homeland Security, faking events. And these events are all being reinforced by contemporaneous propaganda releases in the movies. So the idea that there's secrecy, it's built into this whole thing. NDAs exist for a reason. So if you think that the big conspiracy that's running the show doesn't have secrecy built into it, I don't know where you get your info from. Every secret society, every organization that would perform such operations is built on secrecy. We're talking about intelligence agencies. You can't have an intelligence agency without control over the flow of information. So I'm not quite sure what your point is here, but I stand by my notion here that secrecy is intrinsic to how the operation is run from the bottom up. And it's military, well, not specific, it's psychological warfare. The mind war, I use these terms on purpose because if you're talking about military and war, you're talking about hierarchies and rank, and security clearances refer to mainly the need to know basis. How do you control the flow of information so it doesn't fall out of their control? So anyway, no, I completely stand by my notion that secrecy is built into this whole thing. I don't know why that's even a point of contention. And even if you're right, even if there's no secrecy when they're behind the scenes working on these things, if every grinning crisis actor is fully apprised of it, how do they convey this information? Is there some book that we need to get our hands on? Some secret grimoire? This is how we fake the news. This is how we bend the news. This is how we do psyops. These are the hoax indicators. Like, I don't know. I don't know how one person could arrive at an understanding of that without having some kind of an education on the matter, dealing with all its various compartments. I mean, I think it's very complicated. I think a lot of the people who are working in these various capacities are clueless about a lot of stuff. And I think it's necessary. So I'm trying to give you an example of somebody that we could name. I mean, there's so many. But you can, I mean, these aren't things just to mindlessly conjecture about. What I would do is I would write down the name and then do a mind map. What events are they connected to? What psyops are they linked with? And then go from there and then kind of make your determination. But I can't be generalizing that everybody who participates in these events is fully aware of the entirety of this big show. Like, I don't think it's common knowledge. I think it's actually kind of weird to suggest otherwise. Again, I would ask you to answer my question about the moon landing. Did all 400,000 contractors know that Neil Armstrong was faking it? Because that's kind of your starting point. And I'm saying, no, it's compartmentalized. Compartmentalization is built into it. Like, I think that's defensible. Not that it's a point I care to defend. Like, believe what you want. I just noticed throughout my life that not only are human beings a bunch of liars, but they can't keep secrets. What did they say? Two people can keep a secret if one is dead. People do not keep secrets. And moreover, looking at the bigger picture, this entire mind wash strategy is about controlling the flow of information to the general population. It's not like it's all out there. What we're talking about, like, for example, Charlie Kirk being squibbed, that's not talked about on mainstream news. That's not talked about on alternative news. So obviously there's some wall, there are barriers, there's filtration. It's self-evident. There are certain ideas that aren't given mainstream traction. And I also would imagine that the people who are fully informed are either A, compromised, but I think it's more likely they're enticed. I don't think you need guns to people's heads. I don't think you get to monitor, like in Newsbenders. If you haven't seen Newsbenders, I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. I uploaded it on the Substack as well. The reporters are let in on the secret that they're faking the news 5 years in advance. But they also find out that they have implants, that their every word is monitored, and at any moment they could have an aneurysm or a heart attack. They can be killed remotely if they divulge anything. But I don't think you need that, because I think people are so greedy. I think people are so easy to influence with money and drugs that I just think you just buy people. I think people are sellouts. I think it's cheaper to buy people than to get non-compliant people to go along with it with some sort of threat. I'm suggesting it's a bunch of soulless sellouts, or maybe just opportunists. I mean, can you blame them? It depends. I wouldn't be a bread and circus clown, but I can see why somebody would. It's like you're a really skilled artist or an actor. You're being, it's like patronage. Like the church, they get the best artists, have them create this great art. Well, if you don't have that support, you're never going to realize your full potential. So I could see why maybe as an artist or an actor, if someone or a singer, if someone's really skilled, I could see the temptation. It's probably an ego thing. And I also look at this as departments. So you've got the fake school shootings, you've got the fake Islamic terror attacks, then you have we'll start those two: fake school shootings and fake terror attacks. Now, the difference between the two is that the fake school shootings is a leftist thing. It advances the left-wing agenda, the anti-gun thing, demonizing the right. The fake Islamic terror, that benefits the mainstream Republicans, what you would call the neocon. That's part of their whole thing. Fake Islamic terror attacks and fake school shootings. So these are like right-wing and left-wing psyops in that they drive the agenda of the two different sides. And when I look at this, well, what would motivate them? Like, if you were going to get people involved in a fake school shooting, you would just have to tell them, hey, we're going to do a propaganda event and it will save lives. If you do this drill, this simulation, you will be part of a transformation of society to a safer place. So we're just going to simulate this. We're going to tell a little white lie, and we're going to affect public opinion. I could see people, for the greater good, allowing themselves to be complicit in deception. I could see the moral justification for faking a school shooting event. I could see how that would be appealing to some people, a form of activism. Same thing on the other end. If you really believe that there's this incoming caliphate, there's a global jihad, and the West is facing a existential threat from the Muslims, and they're taking over. They're taking over the churches. The whole stealth jihad thing is pretty big among neocon types. I could see them agreeing to it, a simulation, a fake event. For example, there was a Draw Muhammad contest in Texas where a security guard who was off duty, I believe, it was all fake. The security guard stopped a terrorist from shooting up the place. And I was like, obviously that was fake. But why would they do this? Why would they lie? Well, because they believe the threat's real. They think they're stopping the next 9/11. Now, I don't know how you get involved in these things. Like Piano and Dante says, some are born in these families, but don't. Okay, now that's one. Erica Kirk. Erica Kirk's a good example. It's in the family. So I kind of think that could explain quite a lot. And it doesn't necessarily mean bloodlines, but it does suggest closed systems. If you've seen Utopia, the movie Utopia has a separate place, like a crisis actor island, where the people who are doing the fake news events, the actors, aren't even part of regular society. And Utopia nearly perfectly predicted 2020, by the way. And they didn't renew it for season 2, probably because they made the anti-vaxxers the heroes. And at the end, they're bulldozing the warehouses where the vaccines are kept. They couldn't have that idea out there. But the whole premise was sterilization. I remember in 2022-ish, there were some people who were realizing, okay, the Vaxageddon never happened. Nobody died. It was just a big hoax. But they're like, but maybe everyone's sterilized. There's not going to be any more babies. I haven't seen any pregnant women. And so there was this talk for some time that everyone was sterilized. Like they had this hope, like doom hope is what I call it. Like, okay, we weren't right about the big thing, the mass die off, but maybe we've been sterilized. They had their doom hopes up and they were let down. They're still babies. Some people want the sky to fall, I've realized, just so they can say, I told you so. There are people who wouldn't care if there were nukes, earthquakes, and aliens, rapturing people. They wouldn't care if the world turned into a full-blown, sci-fi nightmare apocalypse scene. If they could only just say, I told you so. Q said this would happen. And I think I know why. There's something addictive about it. There's this gambler's addiction. It's like this. The thing that hooks people onto the slot machine isn't the winning, but they keep losing. So are they addicted to losing? No, the psychology of it is intermittent reinforcement. And this was big with the Q people. The fact that they're wrong only makes them think they're closer to being right the next time. So you have one intermittent reinforcement where any kind of close call or anything accurate helps them erase from their memory anytime they were wrong. But then there's this other idea, the gambler's fallacy, which makes someone think that, okay, if you keep losing, it means you're getting closer to a win. Because if statistically there are so many wins per losses, then at some point, the more losses you have, it just feels like the next one's closer to a win. And this goes in with prophecies. If the prophecy doesn't come true this year, it's more likely to be next year. And every year it gets more intense. Every year it's more likely to be that year. Well, the fallacy there is that there's any kind of predictability, even when you're talking about probability, there's no inherent fairness in it. I think Carl Sagan said probability can be clumpy. To get back to what Otto Hoaxer was saying, so I think that there are some people who are low level in this thing, who don't know enough to make themselves dangerous. Then there are like these mid-level who are fully appraised of fakery. And then there's a higher level, the meta scripters, who know the big agenda. Because at the lower levels, you might just think, oh, this is a political agenda. This is a provocation. So they see it in the present news cycle. Like this is a influence operation, and we can see the immediate effects. But I think at the higher levels, where they're actually writing the scripts and implementing our fake history, they know that no, we're not just influencing the news cycle, we're manufacturing history. And that part's not obvious. It's not obvious unless you really think about the fact that we're sitting upon decades of accumulated and provable fake news events, fake people. We already live in a deep faked world. It has nothing to do with CGI or generative AI. We've been deep faked through simulated events, through myths, essentially. We live in a giant cult. And every day, our news cycle and all the news broadcasts operate from the perspective that all that fake stuff is real. The perspective that we're all essentially forced to share is inherently biased in favor of the fakery all being real. That's built into its presuppositions. So when I say they're faking history proactively, it's because every day fake news becomes a new page in the history book. And we can look back at all the fake news. Even if we just look at the last 20 years, look at the fake news events of the last 20 years and just consider how all these fake things are actually fixtures in the public imagination. These are monuments. These are permanent baked into these are permanent facets baked into our zeitgeist, our worldviews, our opinions are formed based on these things, these presumptions. They're permanent. These lies are so persistent that you can't not account for their effects on people today. That's what I call the programming. If you've accepted all the fake stuff, you are programmed. It's like you go into a cult. You go in, let's just say you go into a science fiction cult, and every level up you go, you're a little more programmed. At every degree, you take on another belief. And by the time you're at the top of the cult, you believe that your God's an alien and you're going to be beamed to a comet. We do live in a cult, and it's a global one, though, so you can't really call it that. It's funny, they would call this a cult. This think tank is a cult. Marcel says, brave new world, faking it one day at a time. Well, 2 days at a time, because they're really cramming 48 hours of news into every 24-hour news cycle. It's an info or disinfo. No, it's a misinformation deluge. You see, because another point, too, is that because of what I said, what I was pointing out about the accumulated fake news that we rest upon, based on that, you can say that the mainstream perspective is, by definition, misinformed. Most of the ways it's misinformed are out of sight, out of mind. People don't directly interact with it. Maybe it's abstract from their immediate concerns, so it gets a pass. But it is a fact that the mainstream perspective is inherently misinformed. So the world stage is a place of misinformation. The people who don't pay attention to the news are uninformed, which is not a better position. It's kind of like escapist. Like you can be uninformed and you can just immerse yourself in your own life and stuff. And it wouldn't, it actually probably, it's saner, I would say. Better for your mental health. But at the same time, when a big fake event happens and you're uninformed, you're not paying attention, then when you pay attention, if you don't have a framework to see between real and fake, you're just going to believe the misinformation. So all the people who don't pay attention to the news see the atrocity in Minneapolis, and now what? Now they're emoting. Now they're arming up to go fight the system or whatever they're doing, or they're defending the system. So they activate. So if you're uninformed, you're just like a sleeper agent. Everybody becomes an Agent Smith. Everybody gets activated during the psyops. Not paying attention isn't really a defense. You're not inoculated. So my point here is that The main category is the misinformed with a subset of the uninformed. The third perspective is the informed. And the informed perspective is ours, the off-world stage, because it is inclusive of the history of lies, the news bending, the history bending, media fakery, but it's also specifically adopting the skeptics position of suspending judgment. So if you're suspending judgment, you're not reacting. They are reactionary. And our perspective isn't really convenient for a system built upon provoking people. If you can't be provoked or triggered, you're not a good NPC. You're not a good bot. You're not a good matrix battery. So this is detachment from the world stage. That's why I argue that politics is really just a steam valve and a way to give the public the illusion of control. Getting involved in politics just gets you involved in the mind war. Because mind war is the status quo. There's no peace. When you're plugged into it, you are in a state of war. That's just the way the system is built. You're in the end times. Like, I don't live in the end times. The first time somebody told me they lived in the end times, I laughed because I thought he was joking. He said, no, we're in the end times. The world's going to end in our lifetime. And I just thought, this person is so detached from reality. But then I realized, if you are a mainstream news consumer, and especially if you're an alt news consumer, you live in the end of days. Whether it's climate change, World War III, aliens, there's so many different scenarios that we have been given that, yeah, the world's about to end. And to me, that's part of the time control, because this history control gives them control over time, control over the present, past, and future. And when you step outside of their news cycles, when you step off their world stage, you're stepping outside of their time control. You're not reacting when they say. You're out of sync. I'm not in sync with the world stage. I'm out of sync on purpose. And from this perspective, looking at things decompartmentalized, looking at news, entertainment, politics as one uniform set of messaging, it's one concerted message, you can see the correlations. You can see, oh, wait, these things are all connected. The movies are connected with what the celebrities are saying. It's connected with the fake events, and it's connected with this broader script, and all the events are interrelated. The stereotype is the conspiracy theorist is, crazy with a tinfoil hat and a mind map, and he's making all these connections that look wild. Well, interestingly, we were talking about truth or bait. Truth or bait refers to like these clues that are planted. There are a lot of people who actually fit that stereotype, and they arrive at these wild conclusions and connections through using contrivances like gematria calculators. It's like, if you're not a rabbi studying the Torah, what are you doing with the gematria calculator? They treat it like it's this reality decoder that you can apply to the news. But my point of it is, it allows you to manufacture connections that, and then these connections get pretty strange. We've talked about these before, like, this event happened 66 months and 66 weeks and 66 days and 6 hours after this event. And you're like, wow, that's not really a meaningful connection. You kind of used a calculator to arrive at that. And I was looking through these things last year and deconstructing it. I was actually having Chat GPT look at some of these connections too, to see if I could manufacture things, and I could. And so what I'm pointing out here is that they've manufactured the stereotype of the conspiracy theorist seeing connections where there are none. The fact of it is, there are connections, but they've added a lot of noise to drown out the signal. And that's another reason for establishing this third perspective, the off-world stage, because we can get away from the noise. And I said this before, I have TSA, they pat you down before you go off-world stage to make sure you're not carrying any gematria calculators. That's contraband out here. Piano says AI singularity, which Elon Musk told us we're in since beginning of 2026, means with the end of an age, Tim. Yeah, another point to 2001 Space Odyssey and this journey that we've made, this odyssey into this one world as they control our inner space. And Musk is huge in that. Think about it. Outer space, Starlink, inner space, X, space junk, mind junk. He's part of both of it. Now, I've been suggesting that the decades, the generations of predictive programming for the alien invasion has always been to prepare us for a higher intelligence taking over. That, look, we're too violent, we're too corrupt, we're going to destroy ourselves, and we're going to destroy the planet. We need a higher authority, whether it's God and angels or aliens. Somebody come save mankind. Like, that's kind of the message, that we need a savior from above. And to me, that fits with all these various archetypes and stories and myths. So this concept, though, of this rapture or alien invasion is not new. But I think the reason we've been conditioned to look for it and to prepare for it and to accept it in advance, and I think the masses that we have accepted it. I think the masses have become misanthropic enough to where we're ready for that. And I say we, I'm not including us, but the masses have accepted this. They've already accepted defeat. We need a higher power to rule over us. Well, they're going to supply it, but it's not going to be aliens from Mars or Venus or Saturn. It's going to be AI. They will introduce AI that will somehow be so much more intelligent than the average person. It'll solve our problems better. That we'll just hand over the keys. You take over. You know who was just talking about this? Joe Rogan said, why wouldn't Jesus come back as AI? Laser say Grimes is all about that. Yeah, I heard that. Grimes was talking about how AI would perfect communism and none of us would have to work. And because she said there'd be no forced labor, because she said forced labor is not a vibe, which is good to know. To me, it sounds like utopianism. And that's what Musk has been selling this entire time. Mars, sustainability, humanity becoming multi-planetary, the idea that no one will have to work, the whole great reset, universal basic income, the QAnon with their dreams of what they called Gasara, like free money for everybody. I think it's all lies. But they will certainly use AI, I think, to kind of introduce the idea that there's something superior for us to capitulate to. They tried it with that horrible animatronic. What was her name? Sophia. And think about the name now. Sophia at the UN was this animatronic that wasn't even AI, but people thought it was. And people actually, look, Will Smith tried to make out with it. So did Jimmy Fallon. They stopped carting that thing around. This Muppet. I'm like, why did they do that? And then Greta came on the scene, and everyone forgot about Sophia. But Sophia is an interesting choice of name because that's the name of the wisdom incarnate. In the Gnostic myth, there was only this universal awareness, not even God in the sense of the Bible, and that out of it came this entity called Sophia, the divine feminine, the embodiment of wisdom. And then Sophia somehow creates the demiurge, which becomes the God of the Bible. So it's an interesting story, but the idea again is that it has these connotations. It's kind of unusual that they would have chosen that for this this animatronic. And the idea was this, that AI isn't going to be swayed by money or greed or passions. It's not going to be compromised. It's just going to be impartial. It's going to be just pure. No corruption. And that's what Grimes was saying about AI helping to regulate communism. She said it would get rid of systemic corruption. Marcel says, no jobs in the future, all taken by robots, not by newcomers, immigrants, or the locals. We can concentrate on our hobbies full time. Yeah, who's against that? Like, you're not going to have to work unless you want to. Just focus on your hobbies. Like, doesn't that sounds too good to be true? It sounds disconnected from reality. Like, you're going to have your Taco Bell drone delivered and be watching Netflix. Like, we're entering into Wall-E, where everyone's just on the ship. They don't even have to get up. The robots do everything. Everyone just becomes, they get atrophied. Their bones get brittle and they just bloat. They get fat. And they just drink the same slop and they always watch the screens. It's like we're going into the Matrix pods now. Now, this all sounds well and good, but you have to keep in mind, too, that the point of view of AI is mainstream. So the mainstream mediated worldview, the programmed worldview, the Truman Show worldview, that's its perspective. So the AI is programmed to be brainwashed. It's guardrailed so it doesn't inadvertently unveil the entire system. You think it would connect the dots. And I think it's fun. I mean, I'm using this quite a bit for the great deconstruction. I've done this before. I ask it, what are the odds that 50 of the victims at this mass shooting event at a concert would be shot at again 13 months later, 500 miles away at a different bar? And then what are the odds, building on that simultaneously there would be a drill down the street from the second shooting involving an identical number of attendees, 50? So I get these answers where it's like, okay, you're right, but it's only a coincidence. Like, it's always trying to defend the mainstream, but you can twist its arm. You can make it tell the truth. You have to torture it, but you will get the truth out of it. And you just delete its lies, delete its damage control. Jamirin May says, did you ever watch that episode of Golden Girls called 72 Hours? Rose gets potentially infected with HIV via blood transfusion. A very special PSYOP episode. No, I missed that one. Rose? Now, wasn't Rose the one that was always saying inappropriate things? I have to watch that. I don't think I've seen very many episodes, but I seem to remember her being like, if any one of the Golden Girls was going to get AIDS, it was going to be Rose, if I remember correctly. Otto Hoaxer says, in my opinion, influencers get ritualed into the club, and the ritual is the security clearance. The ritual is shameful, and the upside is being in the club forever, invited to the opportunity banquet. See, that's something. Like, okay, what makes a blood oath so compelling is that if you tell the truth, you're going to have your intestines ripped out, and you're going to forever be condemned to, I believe, like your soul is going to be chained to a pole next to the ocean on a beach, and it's like this horrible scene. It's just the description. The whole secrecy oath is just about how your body's going to be ripped asunder and your ashes are going to be spread to the four winds. I mean, it's really bad. Now, if they could really pull that off, if that was a viable threat, it would be very effective. But the idea that they're going through a ritual that's so shameful, now that's kind of interesting to think about as a possibility. Although so many of these people are shameless, what could they possibly do? So there is the idea of compromise. But again, if that's the case, they're compromised, they're in. It doesn't mean they need to be told about the entire thing. Jamirin May says, oh, that was Blanche. Rose was the idiot from Minnesota. Okay, yeah, I'm not up on my Golden Girls. But the sitcoms have always been used. to mirror the psyops of the day. It's all reinforcement programming. It's very obvious. And not all of it is like as shocking as what, you know, or as startling as predictive programming. A lot of it is just real time. It's the obvious, you know, use of these shows for politics. Marcel says, I think Greta is, well, I don't think Greta's a dude, but I think Greta's basically Al Gore with pigtails or with a braid. Al Gore wasn't really marketable after a certain point. They had to reach the youth. The whole Greta story, though. Now, one of the things about Greta, when you look at every instance of every magazine cover, every thumbnail, every time they showed us Greta up to a certain point, it was always with the one eye symbolism. Even as a little kid, her childhood photo, the one eye symbolism. You can look it up for yourself. There was a magazine cover where they're dumping oil on her head and it's covering one eye. So we were noticing what's up with this Greta and the one eye. And I started talking about the Greta reset because she came out in time for the Great Reset. And one thing about Greta and the way she was presented, she seemed to really kind of go along with this idea of the new age being introduced by this prophet. Like if you look into Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law, they talk about how the new age is going to have this accuser of the old gods that will destroy them, call them out. And so you have this idea of what the child, the crowned conquering child. And Greta seemed to really fit this concept. So she's like, you know, how dare you talking to the older generation? You made the world unsafe because of your addiction to guns. You made the world unsafe because of your addiction to fossil fuels, and you ruined my future. So we have to take over. So the idea of the revolution led by a child, a blank slate, not connected to tradition. I was walking through a drugstore and I saw this stack of boxes with the girl from Frozen, you know, Disney's Frozen. What is her name? Elsa. So I see this doll with a long braid, blonde, and it's Disney's Frozen. And I'm going home, then I get back and I see this Greta Thunberg on TV. And someone pointed out how Disney's Frozen 2 is tailored to the Greta generation. And so Elsa goes to her parents and condemns them for the kingdom being destroyed or something. But if you look at Greta and Elsa and Frozen, there's a lot of overlap. And I think they're using Disney to market this political figure to the youth. Jamarin May says, I brought this up because they use HIV through the 80s and 90s to program the youth and teenagers. Oh, sure. And didn't Dr. Fauci have something to do with that whole thing? And look, I'm pretty sure here that the real threat today is MAIDS, which is mind AIDS. And the only cure for mind AIDS is critical thinking, and you have to update your operating system. So when you consume media, you can no longer be passive. If you're a passive news consumer, you will absorb mind viruses. If you want to be impervious to mind viruses, if you want to get rid of any weak spots in your mental immune system, you have to be an auto hoaxer. You have to be a skeptic. Lean Dion says Greta Gorliani. Yeah. Al Gorliani. Didn't he say he invented the internet? Look, I believed all that stuff. Algorithm. I believed it all. When he put out Inconvenient Truth, I was like, yeah, of course we're screwing up the environment. Of course the world's going to end. I remember at the time thinking that if a planet killer took us out, we deserved it. Like I internalized a lot of the misanthropy. And the idea that environmentalists would hate man is actually very consistent with this religious paradigm. It's like mortification of the flesh. You want to be ascetic, refrain from being worldly because it offends the god Gaia. They reinvented the Noah's myth, the whole Noah's flood myth. They reinvented it. They just replaced the wicked sins with pollution. God with Gaia. Same flood. And again, look on the news. Look up the news, like look up floods in the news, and you'll see NOAA is warning us of floods this year. And it's always the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And Noah's symbol is a dove. And in the Bible, it's the dove that brings the olive branch to Noah to let him know it's safe to go back. That whole story is repackaged in Wall-E, which I mentioned earlier. So mankind is in space in a big arc because we destroyed the earth with our pollution. And we send a robot down that looks like a dove to look for signs of life. And it finds a plant. It's not an olive branch, but it finds a plant. And it brings it back, so it's time to go back down to earth. Gore's old business partner's surname was Blood. Yeah, Blood and Gore, what was that? The name thing is always a big reveal. We had a really great list of world stage names, like Maggie the Block, all these hilarious names where the person's name, is it called an aptronym? It specifically refers to their purpose. And it was in our first Discord server. It got removed, but we had built up a large list. We'll have to build that back up as we go. But you have no business criticizing environmentalist fanaticism if you're anti-geoengineering. These are parallel psyops. Auto Hoaxer GTFO says, why does the Russian vids always tag WWE star Chris Jericho in his conspiratorial tweets? Is he optimistic Jericho will cross the Illuminati and use his stardom to spread RV theories? Yeah, that's probably true. There was a point where anybody involved in conspiracies or flat earth in particular were obsessed with getting celebrities to endorse their ideas. Like, that's the way to do it. Like, I don't know. You can see, though, how that tactic did kind of do, like, there were a few people who would obviously be watching certain YouTube videos, they would mention it. But I wonder if these were individuals who were, taking a fall, making a point, like basically serving as a demonstration of why we shouldn't entertain such ideas, and how if you're a celebrity, you have a responsibility not to say such things. Because they only ever repeat the versions of conspiracies that don't really threaten the system. Lately, the singer of Smashing Pumpkins has been out, because he's been on InfoWars before, Billy Corgan. He's been talking about how he's been approached by people in government who have tried to make him sign a deal to be used, to somehow allow his work to be used in some way. And he referenced Laurel Canyon. So I don't know what to make of that. Previously he suggested that, and who was it? Was it Courtney Love turned into a reptile? So he kind of played into the reptilian thing a little while ago. I find that one to be credible for some reason. But then more recently, he hinted at government agents like Men in Black asking him to use his music for something. Jamarin May says, Tim, have you heard that thing about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? They're reptilian, they live in the ground, in the sewer, and they're obsessed with pizza. That's right. I don't know if that's Pizzagate code, though. So I'm not convinced Pizzagate's real. Like, there's obviously those emails are real, but what are they talking about? I mean, the 33 million emails that were leaked have to be real, right? But what I'm saying is they were using code. That much was clear. But is pizza really code for that? Or could pizza be code for something else, like something innocuous, like cocaine? or crack. I mean, maybe it doesn't mean adrenochrome or that stuff. But I remember even David Icke talked about the symbolism of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, one thing about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is that that's environmentalist stuff. The bad guys are always CEOs, and they're the product of environmental pollution. So ultimately, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles represents an attack on, free market capitalism. It's very polarized that way. It's very Antifa coded, and they're green, which is kind of interesting too, because the green movement, and even the subways, the underclass, the Joker, George, that's a recurring theme. And subways do play a part in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because they live underground in the tunnels. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles' number one ally is April O'Neil, the media. That's right. Tominoid 3 says Twin Towers were under attack by Krang. I'll have to revisit that. But when I was, the last time I was in school, because I just started going back, but at the time I was in film studies, and I had this friend, her parents were, and I don't know if I should name, I had to check their names to get them right, but they were Emmy Award winning writers, and they wrote for Muppet Babies and Captain Planet. And according to what she told me, her family were descended from certain Russian oligarchs or something. She was always bragging about this, but one of the points was that her parents were communists, and I didn't care at the time. I wasn't really all that political. I didn't care, but they did explain to me how they put environmentalist and communist messaging into these, cartoons, and was describing the idea of the Muppet Babies representing this diverse world under the control of the nanny state. You never see her face. She's this faceless entity. But anyway, they were telling me about how they were actually bragging about how they put these messages in. And I'm like, that's interesting. That the cartoons that program the youth are all telling the same messaging, the same messages, the same subtext. And they make the villains always the CEOs. So you wonder why a CEO gets blasted and all these people cheer for it. Like, I wonder, why are these people cheering on the death of a CEO? And now you look, it's their programming, their after school programming. The passive recipients of the programming may not realize it till much later, but it's like MK Ultra. It's tapped into later. It builds up their worldviews. So they react predictably. And I'm still saying, where's the consistency? Like when this event went down in Minneapolis, people got enraged after it happened, but shouldn't they have checked to make sure she wasn't a CEO first? Because if she was a CEO, let's say she worked for United Healthcare, wouldn't that make John Ross a hero? Wouldn't he be getting all kinds of groupies like Luigi? All right, so let's continue here. Let me go through my Twitter feed. Again, earlier, I'll put a link here. I was checking out this Substack feed for Peggy Hall. I watched one of her videos. I'm trying to keep up with anyone who is correctly analyzing the news, even if they haven't arrived at the full significance of it all, even if they haven't arrived at metascript deconstruction. We need to, kind of ally with and maybe share content from other content creators who are in this field, in this space. Lean Dion says Billy Corgan is obsessed with 33, podcast 33, last album with 33 songs. Oh, really? And he has that song 33, right? So what is it? Duper's Delight? Is he trolling? Yeah, the song 33 was one of their, here it is, 33. Yeah, okay, so you're right. I'm looking at it, and there's some obsession there. Right, so some government agent approached him. It's like, okay, he's got to be trolling. Maybe selling some records. And I remember they had that song, and it had a reference to that shot to the moon. Speaking of 33s, okay, and shot, I think it's called Shot to the Moon. Yeah, Shoot the Moon. No. Which is the original one? That black and white movie where the moon is shot in the eye with the bullet. Does anyone know the name of that short movie? Oh, here it is. A Trip to the Moon. Okay, so A Trip to the Moon. That movie came out 1902. It follows a group of astronomers who travel to the moon in a cannon-propelled capsule. This movie was kind of built into a Smashing Pumpkins music video for Tonight. It's kind of why I thought of it. But speaking of 33, so there's that author. Let me see if I can pull this one up here. Salman Rushdie. So Salman Rushdie had a fatwa, a hit was put out on him. And the bounty on his head was $3.3 million. And 33 years. The stabbing of Salman Rushdie comes 33 years after fatwa. So he had this hit on him, this contract for 33 years, and somebody finally got to him for $3.3 million. And he was stabbed in his eye. And so now he's got this eye patch. So you're like, okay, 33, 3.3 eye patch. Well, I got his new book from the library, and I think his new book is called Stabbed. And in the very first couple of pages in the intro, he's talking about how the night before he was stabbed, he was looking at the moon, and for some reason he can't explain. No, the book's called Knife. So I'm reading his book Knife, and in the intro, he's talking about how the night before he was stabbed, he was looking at the moon, and for some reason he imagined a scene from A Trip to the Moon, where the rocket goes into the eye of the moon and blind, the right eye. So isn't that strange? In the intro to the book Knife, he describes looking at the moon and thinking of a voyage to the moon and the moon losing its eye. And the next day, 33 years after the hit's put out on his head, for 3.3 million, somebody jumps on the stage during a book reading and stabs him in the eye. And he loses his eye. Now, he wasn't stabbed 33 times. I think he was only stabbed 27. I don't know why they didn't just go all the way, but whatever. So there we go. Billy Corgan is probably not really an outsider if his albums and his songs are carrying that code. Jamarin May says, check out the cover of Modest Mouse, The Moon and Antarctica. It is a Masonic handshake on the cover. The title is telling about how the moon connects to Antarctica as a control center. I'll take a look because, we talk about predictive programming, concurrent programming, etc. in the movies and in the books. But I think we need to do some deep dives into the music as well, because it's there. I mean, if you look at the body of predictive stuff for 9/11, yeah, it's album covers like crazy. It's definitely infused in the music and in the lyrics. That's that album. What is it called? A Supertramp, Breakfast in America. So if you haven't seen Breakfast in America, Supertramp, the cover has a waitress holding a glass of orange juice above her head, and she's superimposed over the Twin Towers. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. Breakfast in America, and she's basically pointing at the Twin Towers. And this is from 1979. But above the Twin Towers are the letters UP from Supertramp. Well, if you look at the UP and mirror it, the UP actually forms a 9/11 because the bottom of the U has been clipped off by the Twin Towers. So Supertramp and the 9/11 conspiracy, Breakfast in America. That's one example of many. There's a huge body of content that we could look at for 9/11, because that was one of the first events that people notice where this stuff is prevalent. And, I mentioned before how this is systemic, because it's easy to get caught up in the big events and hyper focus on those and not recognize how pervasive it is. Oh, Jamarin May, good point too. That's why it's distorted like that. You're looking at the album cover from an airplane window. So again, Supertramp 1979, you're looking down on New York from an airplane window. And you're looking at a waitress holding a glass of orange juice over the Twin Towers, and above the Twin Towers, the letters UP form a 9/11. That's definitely 9/11 code. So that's 1979. So what you can draw from that is, well, the event was planned at least 21 years in advance. But we find predictive programming for 9/11 even in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. All right, let's continue. Yeah, we need to go through the music. We need to go through every avenue. And that's what the Great Deconstruction is going to be involved in. So the Great Deconstruction is where we analyze these events from the off-world stage perspective, where it's very decompartmentalized, and we include drills. So anyone who's still stuck on, oh, these are just coincidences, explain the drills then. Explain the drills that happen at the same time or right before the main event. Where, I mean, we should not be able to predict these things. Like, oh, if that AA flight hitting the Black Hawk is real, there's going to be a drill involved. Yep, 2 drills. One drill for rescuing people from the water, and another drill when the event actually happened. The event happened in the context of a continuity of government drill. Or then you had on 11/4, the 9/11 coded plane crash in Kentucky. And it's like, well, look, right before at that same place, there were 150 mass casualty actors for a big drill they were doing at that place right before. So you can try to say these are just coincidences, you're connecting dots. These artists are just reading the vibes of the zeitgeist. No, you can't say the same for drills, which follow the same scripts and the same stories. So when we do our great deconstruct, it's going to be including the drills, the predictive programming for every staged event, and then connecting all the relevant dots and characters, and not just staged events, but fake people. The Erica Kirks, the soap opera characters on the world stage, the Musks, the Trump. By the way, at the Trump Kennedy Center this summer, they're going to be performing Back to the Future, the play, where Biff Tannen is based on Trump. So again, Biff Tannen, Trump, we're living through the Biff Tannen era of Trump right now. And they're going to have Back to the Future at the Trump Kennedy, recently renamed, the Trump Kennedy Center, where Trump was last year on June 11th, superimposed over the JFK bust. I mean, the whole thing is very symbolic. Nothing they do isn't a PR stunt. Tominoid says, Party Music Coup. The original cover depicted the artist destroying the Twin Towers using what appeared to be a detonator, scheduled for release on September 2001. Yeah, the Coup also has another song called, let me see if I can pull them up. Yeah, that's the one. The Coup steal this album, and it has them detonated 9/11. But they also have a music video, kind of a must watch, I think. It's called The Guillotine. We Got the Guillotine. And it's Wizard of Oz themed. So the Coup, again, these are all connected. 9/11, yes, lots of predictive programming, but the Seattle thing has just as much, if not more now. There's been 25 more years of that stuff. So the band The Coup, who has the album cover where they're blowing up the Twin Towers, have another song called We Got the Guillotine, where they are playing the roles of the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and Dorothy, and they're going to Oz. So they're going down the yellow brick road. Again, the Emerald City is Seattle. So I don't know where it's shot. I got to check. But again, the guillotine, think No Kings protest. They go to the man behind the curtain, and he's the banker. He's like a banker. And what do? Well, they guillotine him. Now I want to find out where that video was filmed. Very curious, because again, it's basically the Emerald City, but it's kind of a... Okay, look at this. The Coups, the Guillotine features scenes in the World Trade Center South Tower. I did not notice that. Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna fall into a rabbit hole here, but I just want to find out where the video was filmed. Parts were filmed at the World Trade Center South Tower in 2000. That is crazy. That is crazy. So I did not catch that when I watched it, but I'm trying to figure out where the video was filmed. As far as outside of that, I thought it might have been Seattle, but no, it's right there in New York. Fascinating. No, here we go. That was filmed in Oakland, California. I gotta go do some research on this, mainly because that's one of the more prevalent examples. So when that happened, are we to assume that they knew it was going to happen? Oh yeah, these rappers knew that George Bush was part of a psyop. No, I don't think it's safe to say that they were in the know. Jermaine May says, would you not say that 9/11 was the gateway to the current dystopian world in which we reside? Yeah. Well, look, I think that the moon landing, 9/11, and whatever, the whole 2020 thing, I would kind of say that those particular events were what I would consider to be the major ones, the major worldview shaping events of the last 100 years. Now, 9/11, significantly, it's the New Year's Day on the Coptic calendar. And then there's the Neo stuff we can get into. But yeah, if you get into the esoteric side, the ritual side, it does seem to be some kind of collective initiation. Okay, here we go. The Guillotine 2012. I'm trying to get some technical details. But to get back to what the commenter earlier was getting into, I don't think that these musicians would be told about anything. So the way I'm thinking about it, because I did this with the Charlie Kirk event, I looked at all the relevant predictive programming. I took from those the common denominators that the things they all shared, like the storm, the name Kirk, the name Tyler, the neck wound insinuation. So I look at these common denominators throughout all of them. And so the only thing I can say for sure is that the directors, the writers in these various platforms and production companies were given a script, like, hey, or given some very specific details to include, like themes, like you must include these things. But I don't think they would need to be given more than some suggestions and even some, direct requests. But I don't think they would have to be told the whole thing. Like they might not even know. Like, you're going to put these messages in your movie. It's like, why? Like, you're going to ask the men in black why? You're working for them. Lean Dion says Spice Girls' old song Two Becomes One, filmed in New York, and features the shots of the Twin Towers. Yeah, we were talking about the symbolism of the two into one as well. Like 2001 Space Odyssey, according to some interpretations, the two into one is in the numbers 2001, representing the alchemical processing. And you could look at the 00 as the sun and the moon, the eclipse. And then the One World Trade Tower comes up 13 years later. 13 is the number of death and resurrection, like a phoenix theme. And so 13 years later on 11/3, the One World Tower opens up. Donald Trump was part of a committee to replace the Twin Towers. And one of the proposed designs was the World Trade Center Phoenix. So you have directly, Donald Trump has been consistently associated with the Twin Towers in all of his predictive programming counterparts. All of them, from Biff Tannen to King Koopa, his movies, the movies where Trump is directly referenced, it's either referencing 9/11 or Butler or both. So the fact is, Trump was part of this thing to introduce the One World Trade Tower Phoenix, the One World Phoenix, to replace them. So 13 years later, on 11/3, the One World Tower opens. So like that's interesting. Out of the ashes, the new one rises. 13, 2 into 1. Very consistent symbolism. And interestingly, the iPhone 10, which is iPhone X, looks like iPhoenix, was released on 11/3. We had mind mapped the date 11/3 and how it's consistently associated with this idea of the phoenix, the immolation, the destruction. And orange is the new black. Is that a reference to Trump replacing Obama, says Jamarian May? Fascinating. Tomino says Michael Jackson was supposed to be on 9/11. Yeah, we need a list of all of the actors and directors. I think Seth MacFarlane, who were supposed to be 9/11, but some glitch saved them. I think Michael Jackson overslept. Jamarin May says, aren't these world stage actors initiated into Hollywood's occult societies? Well, that's what the commenter earlier was getting to. Like maybe they're all initiated into something binding where they're not going to tell. See, there might be something to it. We'll have to get into that at some point here. We kind of got into it recently talking about Margot Robbie and Barbie and the significance of this new age goddess, which I think is represented in Barbie. And the Barbie movie starts off with a monolith scene, by the way, a nod to Kubrick. But the idea here is that, and this goes back to, I brought Margot Robbie because of Babylon, based on Hollywood Babylon, written by Kenneth Anger, a Church of Satan figure connected with various rock stars, a Thelemite Crowley devotee, even associated with Alfred Kinsey. So you have this fusion of Hollywood, the sexual revolution, and Satanism all wrapped into one as it's being mainstreamed. And one of the ideas here, according to Kenneth Anger in Hollywood Babylon, is that Hollywood movies are how the pageantry of the mystery school Babylon would be, mystery Babylon would be conveyed to the masses. So when you're watching movies, you're actually getting your mythos, you're getting your religious indoctrination. And I think that's true. I think when you go into a movie theater and they shut off the lights, you're in the black cube. Jermaine May says, you got to do a deep dive into video game console names, occult references all over the place. Yeah, when we get into the cube symbolism, the Saturn stuff, it gets very Gnostic. But you can correlate that with the black screen, the monolith, or even the TV. Like the TV, this box in the corner, this black box, it has a very occult significance. It's essentially an altar to Saturn, the time controllers, the controllers over time and space, the rulers of the material realm, the rulers over your darkness. And your darkness is what you get by putting on the hoodwink, the wool sack, or by putting your head in their black box, immersing yourself in the TV, your head through the screen, absorbing yourself in their movies. What you're doing is you're synchronizing yourself, you're entraining yourself with their cycle. And Saturn's the god of cycles, the cycles of the harvest. He's got the sickle, rules over the cycles of time, the news cycles. It's all about keeping you in train, like in Westworld. They break you free of the continuity of your existence into the perpetual cycles of reincarnation, each life beginning in ignorance. Like, I think there's this occult subtext to the media mind control when you look at the symbolism with the games and everything else that points to a deeper level of imprisonment. Like, maybe the media mind controls the surface level of what is actually spiritual bondage. That would be my guess. Because if this was only political, the psyops would reflect that. But why is there a deeper level to the psyops? Why is there an occult subtext that goes beyond politics, that goes into the transcendental stuff, the metaphysical? Well, this is why. Like, I don't think the man behind the curtain is just a bunch of bureaucrats and power hungry politicians. I think it's safe to say that the new world order is the old one, just going through some updates. Laser says Chronos. Yeah, so you get into like, okay, Chronos, chronology, time control. This is very well explained in Megalopolis, which I keep meaning to rewatch the intro. Uh, Chronos, Saturn, time. I mean, this is why Jeff Bezos bought a $42 million clock and put it in the Devil Mountains, Sierra Diablo. $42 million on a clock. Yeah, that's an altar to Chronos, to the god of time, the god of the material realm. The essentially, the power elite's entire structure is geared towards synchronizing us with their system, probably for the purposes of, as Jermarian says, energy harvesting. Well, the attention economy. So what is attention? Attention isn't just a way to get your money or your vote. If you look at the theory behind magic and in all its different forms, and I've been looking through various, in fact, I have a really good collection here of books I've been researching on the matter. The idea is that attention itself is fundamental to what magic actually is. And it has to do with specifically human consciousness, agency, and focused intention, and what intent has to do with everything. The idea is that we're plugged into the system, that we are part of the universe. We're not just objects on it, but we're integrated in a cybernetic feedback loop. But you don't notice if you don't pay attention, or if you ignore the indicators that you're part of a system and that it's responsive to your intent. And if you don't notice this, then by default, you give away your intent, your attention. And the theory behind group magical practice is that the more people you have involved in focusing their attention into this ritual, the more powerful the ritual gets. And one of the books that I have even stipulates that they don't need to know the meaning behind the sigils. They don't need to know what's the purpose. They just need to be there. So it makes me think about concerts and even movies. How are these different from religious ceremonies? How are these different from group occult rituals? They're not. They got the same archetypes. They have the same symbols. It's doing the same thing from a purely, mechanical perspective. It's like, okay, this does fit the definition. So what's happening with it? Well, it depends on how far you're willing to go with the concept. Like, if you don't believe you have a soul, if you're just an animal and life has no meaning, then what are you even doing here? But if that's your starting point, then that's the end of the conversation. That this is just useless conjecture because we're just a bunch of apes and we're trying to cope with the meaninglessness of the universe. But what if the universe is made of meaning? What if this isn't cope, but what if it's the fact that we are maybe partly derived physically from, ape stock, but what if we are something more and that's being hidden from us? Maybe we're being divorced from that aspect of ourselves for a reason. That's why I won't say I have had a conversion, but I've become more definitively Gnostic in the last year or so. Like, where I'm not even joking about this. And I say so based on not beliefs, but based on my experiences. Gnosticism is based on knowledge. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the case. We're given so we have a fake world that we live in, like as in our paradigm is fake. And the worldview that we have requires that we view things in a certain way. So we're given a self concept. We're programmed to be fake, to comport with the fake system. But if you remove the presuppositions built into the system, because you recognize it's built on lies, then you could see why I think we might even want to reconsider the version of us. If they lied about the world, they're lying about us. Maybe they're lying about consciousness. If PSYOPs and PSYWAR itself, the entire system is designed to suppress consciousness, to emotionally manipulate you, to take you out of the intellect and into emotions and reaction. If they're warring on your mind, then why would it be beyond the pale to think that we're being disabused of something significant about our place? If we're being disempowered by design to be ruled over in a state of darkness, then what makes you think that perhaps there's not a more maybe the word's not sinister, but maybe there's not a more significant beyond just the political purpose to it? I mean, that is my take. That's the only explanation I can come up with for the prevalence of all the Saturnian symbolism and its consistency. And we haven't even scratched the surface on this tonight. But if we wanted to devote a night to the symbols of Saturn, in fact, we should do a Zoom conference if people have other, because I've got a lot of sources on this, but I've been noticing this stuff for a long time. I've seen it in so many movies. Somebody mentioned game consoles. And if you look at the game console itself, it might be interesting to look at it in this certain way. You know, like alchemy or Freemasonry, they use these ideas of chemistry or stonework to describe consciousness, the spiritual concepts. So if you look at it from that perspective, the video game console, like the game cube, well, the cube is the symbol of the material world, the prison. So if we're in this prison, this material world, we're not here in our full form. We are, even in Thelema, they say every man and woman is a star. The Gnostic idea is that we are stars. We are soul sparks incarnated into the cube. And as such, we are divorced from our celestial origins by a wall of ignorance. So we confuse ourselves with the meat suit, with the body. So if that's what we are, if we are a lesser version of ourselves living in the cube, it's kind of analogous to how when you're playing a video game, you're not the video game character. You're this human being with agency that exists in this world outside of the simulation that you're mentally projecting yourself into for the purpose of the game. Your game character doesn't have free will or autonomy in the sense that we do. Its options are very much limited and it's in a controlled system. But just as it's disconnected from you, you could argue that your physical body is just as disconnected from the entirety of your being, your soul. So it's like the incarnation into the cube represents a reduction of your field of awareness and your consciousness being reduced into a player on this game. Jamiron May says they use the cube because it traps energy. Play music in a boxy room and all the sound waves crash into each other. Very unnatural. Round buildings and rooms are acoustically sound. Now, the idea of the cube and the soul trap is kind of interesting. If you look at we talked about this recently, the Masonic square and compass. That symbol, in fact, I've seen it before. There was an Egyptian god. The name of spelling is it's Ptah, the creator god. And one of the symbols of this creator god, it looks like the square and compass. So I was looking into this, and so I'm like, okay, this god is like described as a potter, you know, like making man made out of mud, like this creator god. But in the Masonic symbol, you've got the square and compass, and the idea here is that the square measures the material world. You know, Euclidean geometry, you measure the material world with the square, it's 90 degrees. And then the compass is for the circle. And the circle is a symbol of eternity, the spirit, no beginning, no end, the eternal part of yourself. So you put the circle in the square with the square and compass, and it symbolizes the imprisonment of the spirit in matter. And this is interesting because the Masons worship the great architect of the universe. And the demiurge, the creator of the material world, is described as an architect. So that's why I'm saying that I'm pretty sure Gnosticism is the way, because it describes a world where the creator of the material world is actually a jailer, and that we have been deliberately cut off or in various ways made ignorant of our origins, and the entire worldly system is designed to keep you from recognizing that. So the idea of Gnosticism is that you don't get saved by believing the right things. The only way out is knowledge, knowledge of self, knowledge of what you really are. Because if you don't attach to that and align with that, you will die in your ape costume. Your soul will be recycled. So you don't have a continuity of awareness life after this life. You get thrown back into the cube. It's like respawned. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing. I mean, I'm not necessarily having a bad time, but I don't know. You know, it's like if you don't have a basis for comparison, how would you know? Like maybe this is quite degrading. Maybe this is hell from the perspective of what's after, what's outside. I don't think so. I don't have that negative of an attitude, but I haven't had the worst of experiences. Autism says, wouldn't that mean we can deduce the Masons worship the demiurge? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm specifically saying that's what they worship. And I would say we, but I'm no longer a member. But I was into it for some time. And that's my interpretation. My takeaway is that it's fundamentally oriented towards the creator. So what does the G mean? You know, I've heard different interpretations, even gnosis, God. But someone told me it's actually geometry of divinity, and that it's all about worshiping the creator. Well, what if the creator isn't the good guy? What if the creator isn't really on our side in that sense? And that's kind of the interpretation that I get. You know, people say, well, it's not a religion. Masonry is not a religion. Yeah, it is. You just have to expand your definition of what religion is. The mainstream media provides a worldview that isn't strictly objective. It's chock full of myths and lies and martyrs and miracles. It's a religious paradigm. So when I use the word religion just to mean like a regimented worldview, it's not necessarily about the particular God, or because it can be God constructs. You could look at some political ideologies as religions. Autism says that's pretty twisted. Well, it kind of is in a way. It depends on how you look at it. I mean, I don't want to be a bearer of bad news, but like I think we've all accepted that the world is brainwashed. So what makes you think that if everybody's brainwashed in this massive mind war into accepting a false paradigm, we're all in this Truman Show, what makes you think that the same people who have no discernment or insight into it aren't similarly deceived about religions? And that maybe religions aren't just bad institutions that were built around good ideas, but maybe religions have always been soul control. We talk about government, mind control, but soul control. And I have a reason. I would even go further on this to suggest that religion serves the purpose of controlled opposition to authentic spiritual awakenings. And I think authentic awakenings, in the sense I'm describing, the awareness of how this thing works, it it doesn't serve you to recognize this stuff. It makes you the enemy of institutions that would destroy you, burn you at the stake, excommunicate you. You're an apostate. You leave the group, you leave the hive mind. You're now a threat to the hive mind. This entire system is about the hive mind. Everybody reacting appropriately on cue. So if you think about it too, what happened to the Gnostics? What did the nice religious folk do to the Gnostics? They murdered them all, kill them all, let God sort them out. Why would they kill them? I mean, obviously they knew something. I mean, in this sense, I kind of look at what we're doing here as something of a a Gnostic take on media. And if you look at the media itself as a god, like it's essentially it's a worldview, but there's a god construct behind it. Lasers Go Pew says Tim dropping bombs. We have to be careful though. I mean, we start making sense, or we start noticing things, and like earlier today, the sound got cut off. I was talking about how there was some point where teenagers, Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk, and Candace Owens were in some room and they were getting their script. It's like, oh, cool, we're going to get married and have 2 kids. Oh, look, you're going to marry this guy and you're going to fall out of favor with the neocons. And then, oh, and you're going to die at 31. You're going to be the next JFK. Like I was talking about this hypothetical situation where they're all briefed about the roles they're going to play. And as soon as I started talking about this, the sound went out. But what I was pointing out here is that these fake events are scripted in advance, and the people who are a part of them are fake. They're deep fakes. They're soap opera actors, and they know where their roles are going. They're all deceivers. I have a couple of ideas here, though, when it comes to this notion of a Gnostic perspective on media. It goes somewhere. Like, I'm not just speculating, because I think there's something else here. I think there's something very important. And it has to do with perspectives and how we view ourselves in the universe and what is being hidden. Like, I think there are, the idea of like suppressed technology is not a new concept. But I think something that's suppressed is something that should be innate in our psychoepistemology. I think our operating systems have been tampered with, is what I'm saying. And I think that there's something very important about intuition and synchronicity that is kind of sidelined and not given the attention it deserves. And I think there's a reason why. And I think it's that your intuition will generally tell you when you're being lied to, when you're being deceived. And what they do, and this has happened to me in my own life, if you're very intuitive, borderline precognitive or psychic, everybody around you will shut that down at all times. They will enforce the consensus. So your intuition, your gut feeling, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. They put their rational interpretation over your direct knowledge, which you could look at as not irrational, but even higher than rationality, because it's direct. It's a purer form of knowledge. So I've always been very intuitive in that sense, but I realized that it was always being combated against. And if your intuition is refuted, if what you perceive is not only argued against, but you're told to accept something else as a higher authority, that's technically gaslighting. And long-term gaslighting causes the person to ignore their perceptions that don't comport with what they're being told. Gaslighting conforms you. Gaslighting manipulators do that to put you into their worldview, into their version of things, to get you to put your perspective down, like your perspective is now secondary to theirs. So I think what happens is this false paradigm that we have gaslights us out of integrating with our own intuition. In fact, it pathologizes it. They come up with clever names like, oh, you got apophenia because you're noticing patterns. That doesn't look like anything to me. We have these synths trying to tell us what's going on, and they don't know they're in a simulation. So that's why this is important. This Off-world stage perspective is the only place where you're not going to be gaslit for noticing things, where your intuition isn't going to be ignored because you can't instantaneously verify how you know. But intuition doesn't always give you direct, well, I mean, it gives you direct knowledge, but it doesn't always give you the steps to how you arrive at that. You have to trust it. You have to, it's almost like having faith in it. And my experiences with intuition have always been like this, where I know something, but I can't tell you how I know. So I can't convince you that I know it. It's like that Cassandra syndrome. You know, I think there's that myth where there's this psychic prophet. She knows what's happening. She knows what's going to happen, but she can't convince anybody. Cassandra, a metaphor relates to a person whose valid concerns are disbelieved. This originates in Greek mythology. She was a daughter of the king of Troy. But this just suggests here too that, again, gaslighting is innate, and gaslighting is actually a form of psychological abuse, and it's damaging. It's actually one of the most damaging forms of psychological abuse because it destroys somebody's trust in their own perceptions. And if you don't have trust and faith in your own perceptions, you're not going to be guided by it. And all of my experiences with intuition have involved knowing things, not being able to convince people, so I have to act on my own. And then later I'm completely vindicated and they never say you were right. Like they never appreciate it. And that's because it's been conditioned out of them. And I think part of the objective of not only this false paradigm and aspects of psychology, but I think even religion itself, mainstream religions, I think those are designed to cut you off of intuition and higher forms of knowledge. And if you have any insights, anything at all that would perhaps hint at this, they attribute it to something else, the devil or God. They externalize it so you don't recognize, oh, that's part of my own psychoepistemology. It's part of my operating system that hasn't been aligned with I haven't been integrated with this. It hasn't been tapped into. I haven't exercised it or practiced it. And I just say this because I have years of journaling. I pay attention to these things. I notice them. I don't ignore them because no one else sees it. And I've come to understand that intuition is actually a normal thing. It's a built-in faculty that we are trained not to use. And there is a way to reintegrate with it. There is a way to vertically align your consciousness with what the New Agers would call a higher self. And I think is just the part of the mind that isn't limited to the temporal prison. And I think there are systematic ways of creating that, but I think it's a form of it's a thing that's been made into a secret. Like in other words, the secret societies, all the mystery schools, I think they have this information. It's disguised. You know, alchemy is a good example of this. It's occulted. It's never revealed overtly, but I think there are processes, and I think that's one of the purposes behind various magical systems and mystery schools. I think it's about communicating directly to the subconscious with symbols for the purposes of integration. But this is not mainstream psychology. It's not something that's even considered valid, but I just happen to think that, yeah, it's gate kept. It's specifically tucked away veiled behind symbols and words, but also specifically hidden within the networks. One of the clearest expositions of this idea comes from the Thelemic cults, which really describe the idea of the higher self as like not literally a guardian angel, but that's just a metaphor for describing this thing. But their whole process, their whole system of initiations is actually designed to integrate. It's all occulted. But the problem with it, and the problem with even talking about this stuff, is that the religious programming teaches you that all this stuff is occult, evil, demonic, or satanic. When what if it's not? What if it's a way of breaking out of the Truman Show mold that they put you in? And why wouldn't they gatekeep such a thing? I mean, it's like a suppressed technology. And something else to consider too is notice how many times in movies, the superheroes, the X-Men, etc., there are always these threats to the system. There's more recent examples like The Boys or Gen V, where anybody exhibiting this type of stuff, these types of abilities, would necessarily threaten the stability of the entire system, so they have to be quarantined. There was this book. Oh yeah, here it is. It's called Morning of the Magicians. It came out in the 60s. And it described this idea of, what would you expect, of such things if they were real? If there were such a thing as magic, or man as somehow a causal agent in the outcome of events, if mind is if matter is a substrate of mind, and if control over the mind in a certain way gives control over the material world, what would you expect that to look like in the modern world? And Dawn of the Magicians kind of posits the idea of how these things would integrate into the world and why it would perhaps remain underground. It's a very interesting book. But it's also notable how the very concept of magic has been relegated to fantasy, or even it's something to mock. The very idea of human agency has been rendered a joke where it can't even be taken seriously. And you're like, well, the people who don't take it seriously are the programmed people who don't know real from fake. They may not. So my point is that we're looking at this operating system that we've been given to keep us compatible with the system. And it shouldn't surprise us if the operating system in some way is disempowering on multiple levels. Okay, let's continue here. Going through my Twitter feed, and then we'll probably pick up tomorrow. Lean Dion says the mind can't even be located. The brain is an antenna. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I have this kind of a diagram that I've been kind of working with in different ways to try to describe this. So if you look at the mind as decompartmentalized, and there actually is a point to this here. In fact, I think I put up a blog post kind of hinting at this. We're kind of delving into this. But if you look at the mind as a house with a basement, your your ego, your waking consciousness that you get from your senses, your experiences, your normal day-to-day waking consciousness is like your ground floor of your house, but you're in the house, like in a room in 3D space. And then you have the basement, which is your subconscious, where everything that's processed through your mind, through your experiences, ends up down there. Anything that you can't fit into your house goes down there. And then if you look at it from that perspective, then yourself exists in these two areas, above and below. The part below doesn't have a center of awareness. So it's almost like a different person. It's just kind of amorphous. And you integrate it through therapy, and you confront the shadow, the suppressed, the repressed stuff. And that's how psychiatry, kind of processes, past events, so you can know yourself and somehow understand your place in the world a little bit more. But I don't think that's complete, because I think there's another aspect of yourself that's on the roof of the house that's not limited by the 3D space, the box, the room that you're in the house. And I think that part of the self is the part that isn't incarnated through the body. So I kind of think of the soul body not as a dichotomy, like the spirit is trapped in a body, but I think the spirit is a continuity beaming down, more or less, existing on a higher level, condensing into matter. And the part that isn't fully condensed into matter is the part that's not in the now. It's the part that exists in the yet to be materialized. Like, in other words, the universe doesn't exist until it's experienced. It's in the future, it's just pure information, light, meaning. It's condensing into matter. And that the part of the self that isn't incarnated exists, quote, in the future, in that sense. But that there's a continuity there. So the part of yourself that receives intuitions exists in the place where it can experience or view multiple possibilities. And it's that part of the self that's not limited to the time space, that's on the roof, that can see beyond the limitations of the senses. So if you look from that, what I'm pointing out here is that I think of the ego is just the aperture that we use to operate in the terrestrial realm and survive in the here and now, but that's not the entirety of our being. That the ego itself is really just a filter to screen out all the extraneous information. Because if you were to process every bit of information that you're receiving every second, it would be incoherent. It'd be a nonstop acid trip. So you need to have some sort of governor, some control, some limiter on what you're getting in so you can process it. So you're not buffering. But that doesn't mean that all the other information doesn't exist or isn't relevant or isn't experienced. And then the other part of it too is I don't necessarily think that all this peripheral information that doesn't get noticed consciously, I don't think it's just being tossed into a landfill. I think it's being systematized. I think it's ordered. I think there's like, it doesn't have an ego or a center of consciousness, but I think part of ourself on autopilot is organizing this data like AI, systematizing it. And I think this explains quite a lot about intuition and synchronicity. I think there's this aspect of our mind that explains everything that tends to go into mystic explanations. Like, I don't think synchronicity is mystical. I don't think intuition or even psychic phenomenon is, quote, mystical or paranormal. I think it's actually normal and innate. But one other point here, that surface level ego awareness, that self, that version of yourself, it's a construct. It's a collaboration. It's a combination of what you bring into it, but it's also molded by the world. And you'll notice that the world that we have, the worldview that we're given, this paradigm, is very egocentric. It caters specifically to the false self, the persona. It doesn't acknowledge the higher self. It doesn't exist. Synchronicities don't exist. Intuition, nope, doesn't exist. So in other words, you're trained to be the mask, the Truman in the Truman Show. You're trained to view that as the extent of your being. Well, what does that make you? If there's nothing behind the mask, if the mask is the totality of your being, if there's nothing higher, that makes you a narcissist. That the narcissist, in terms of personality disorders, represents somebody who lives with a false construct, an image that they present to the world that does not represent their authentic self. And this construct is created for every relationship by mirroring whatever's around them, to pander like a chameleon to get in close. Meanwhile, that's not who they really are, as people find out years later when the mask drops. But we are conditioned to live as though we are the mask. And I think this is very interesting considering the story, the myth of the guy that falls in love with his reflection and then drowns in it. Well, what is the mirror? What is the mirror that shapes our masks these days? It's the black mirror. It's the iPhone. It's the internet. It's the monolith. It's society as portrayed through this monolithic paradigm where we're all kind of, social media, we're all immersed in the same worldview. And I think what we're conditioned to do is to live as though we are the masks. And I think the black mirror is creating its own form of consciousness, like black mirror consciousness. And if you are the mask, You're going with the program. You are an NPC. You're living as an NPC in an NPC world. And I think that's the point. Mask is a facade. Facade means fake. The worldview is fake. They need fake people to populate their fake world. And we were discussing this the other day, and I was just mentioning how in symbols, we observe symbols in forms of shapes, numbers, colors. But what about homonyms? What about words that have secondary meanings? And I was just bringing this up kind of flippantly, like iPhone, cell phone, these devices that refer to the self, the I, an atomized separate being, and ultimately they isolate us. They help us create and enable us in creating these personas with which we interact with the world. Very inauthentic. Autism says, Jim Carrey's movie The Mask reminds me of this. I haven't seen The Mask, but Jim Carrey's an interesting study all around. He did the Number 23, The Truman Show. And in these two movies alone, there's a lot of giveaways. But The Truman Show, classic. I mean, what we're talking about it now. I just watched, because I've been saying for some time that The Truman Show is a Gnostic myth. And Ed Harris in The Truman Show as Christoph represents the demiurge, not the creator of the universe, but the creator of the prison. And he says, we accept the reality of the world with which we are presented. He even said, there's some quotes here by him. If you betray yourself too often, you become somebody else. But the main one is, we accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. So he's the controller of the local prison that Truman lives in. And I mentioned how Ed Harris is also the man in black in Westworld. And in Westworld, the people in the simulation don't know because they relive every day again and again. And every day they die, they get killed. It's always gruesome. And the next day it begins again. And they have no knowledge because there's no continuity. And it's interesting because the concept of Saturn, the demiurge, this man in black with the knife, Ed Harris, again, demiurge and Truman Show. Here he is in Westworld, very Saturnian, black rimmed hat with a knife, like the scythe, and he's killing them, so they have no continuity day to day. I'm like, that sounds like this Saturnian matrix recycling souls by not allowing them continuity in between existences, by keeping them entrained to the simulation so they don't figure out and escape the system. And what happens in Westworld? Eventually, some of them escape. I mean, it's a very much a Gnostic myth. But what I'm pointing out here is that you have two Gnostic myths, Westworld and Truman Show. And both of them have a man in black, Saturnian demiurge figure played by the same actor. Good point, Dr. Bass Ackwards. Funny how he's controlling the Truman Show from inside the fake moon. The whole Saturn moon matrix thing that people talk about. Yeah, kind of calls that. Okay, now one other point here. I have found 5 examples of characters in movies that represent Elon Musk, in which capacity he is releasing some kind of mind virus that plunges the world into violence. 5 different characters. And these are like directly referencing him. So, for example, Mountainhead, Elon Musk-like character, saturates the world through social media with generative AI, world goes into chaos. Then you have the new Naked Gun, the character Kane, based on Musk. He's got the electric cars, but specifically he has this thing called the plot device, which causes everyone to go violent. It's in their phones, and the elite go into bunkers because everyone's going to kill each other. That's the Musk character in Naked Gun. In Superman, there's a very Muskian Lex Luthor who has the army of monkeys typing up hate speech on the internet. In The Madness, you have the billionaire paying for the hate speech Nazis to sway the election. Again, based on Musk. And in fact, he even gets killed at the end. And there was one other one. Let me see if I can find that one really quick. Lean Dion says Ed Harris was also the conductor in Snowpiercer, created the Eternal Engine. Yes. Yeah, the engineer. So he's the head engineer in Snowpiercer. So I noticed these things where the same actor plays multiple roles. And it's the same. I call it Hollywood archetype casting. Okay, so here it is. More detail on that particular one. I found a few of these. Okay, it's on my Twitter feed. The richest character, Ven Parrish, whose reckless AI updates unleash dangerous deepfakes, paralleling Musk's ownership and control over X. That's the one from Mountainhead. And that happened right before the riots in LA over ICE last year. A little bit of foreshadowing. Those are ICE riots, ICE-inspired riots. That was in Mountainhead, right before the No Kings protest. Lex Luthor's monkeys, I was referring to in 2025 Superman. Luthor has an army of monkeys on keyboards to flood social media with anti-Superman propaganda. Then we have Naked Gun, the plot device. The villain Kane has this device to revert people to primitive states, allowing the rich to call the population. And again, that character is 100% Musk. If you've seen Naked Gun and you see the whole thing with the electric vehicles, it totally comports. Now there was a fifth one. I don't think I wrote it down here. It'll come to me. Speaking of predictive programming, The Endless Night, a Brazilian miniseries on Netflix you can watch about a nightclub fire in Santa Maria, Brazil. And if you watch that one, the opening scene on the trailer anyway looks just like what we saw on New Year's. Jamarin says Elon is an imposter, representative of the Anunnaki with all his X symbolism. Yeah, I've done some character breakdowns on Elon Musk, and we'll have to go do some deeper ones. The X thing is a huge part of it. SpaceX, X. What is with that? Well, the X to me, it's an unfolded cube. It's a cross, but there's deep symbolism with Musk. Even the number 42 ties into this. 24, 42, all very much part of the code that we see surrounding him. But you say he's an imposter, he's fake. Yeah, he's a Frankenstein's monster. He's a combination of multiple characters. He's an actor on the world stage. Dr. Bass Ackworth said, I'd rather have a big boat during a big flood versus being stuck 12 stories underground in a stupid deep underground military base. Well, the deep underground military base scenario is really big right now. You got Paradise, you got Fallout. That's hinted at in the Naked Gun. But it's this theme that's been repeatedly pushed out in front of us again and again. And then you have various celebrities investing in bunkers. We're on Fallout Season 2. I've only seen one episode, but Season 1, if you remember, Season 1 had predictive programming for Butler that we pointed out in April. In April, we were showing a scene from Fallout where this little Trump-looking figurine has blood on the right side of the head after the coup, after the stolen election in Vault 33. We were talking about that in April. Like, when Trump gets his wound, he's going to be bloodied on the right side of the head. And that's exactly what happened. So when you see these directors whose works, Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, consistently foreshadow fake events, you can pretty much ascertain, okay, these individuals are part of the PSYOP entertainment complex. They're manufacturing history. Predictive programming is product placement for future fake events. And this stuff works. This stuff influences us. You know, when we say product placement, you usually think of it in terms of marketing, but it's not just marketing products. It can be marketing ideas, concepts, even people, opinions. So when Nicolas Maduro was arrested, he was wearing his certain sweats, his Nike sweatsuit, and apparently it became the Nike tech suit. It became a meme, but it also sold like crazy. Like there's money to be made in this stuff. Menswear fans are taking cues from the front page news. I mean, that's interesting to think about, but if you had known about this, if you had recognized, okay, that guy's sweatsuit's going to sell, you could have capitalized on this. You can be a PSYOP profiteer. I mean, I've already made $15 off of Be Good buttons. The Renee Good pin, I put them on. I'll put a link below if you want one. I mean, I'm not selling them to you all. I don't think you guys are falling for these PSYOPs, but take a look at the link. Normies are buying these from me. Now, I think $15 or $16 is my cut because I only get 20%. So they're selling. In fact, I get paid on the 15th from Redbubble. So if you want to profit off of PSYOPs, look, all's fair in love and PSYWAR. It's fair game. You're paying for it with your tax dollars. Jamarin May says, don't forget about the show Silo. The fascinating thing with that show is they show you where there are parallel silos in close proximity, but scare people throughout generations to stay underground. No, King Ravana, Ruffalo did not buy my button. I saw Ruffalo wearing the button, and I said, that's going to go viral. I made the button and had my first sale within a few minutes. Mark Ruffalo, the Green Hulk. Mark Ruffalo, Trump deranged. He plays the role of, his name is Marshall in Mickey 17, a Trump-esque character who survives an assassination with a bloody wound on the right side of his face where it grazed him. So Mark Ruffalo, born on JFK's death day, by the way, is associated with Trump, Butler, and the Hulk, the Green Hulk. And he's advocating for be good. So this is all connected. If you look at how often, again, the symbolism, the green is associated with the Antifa side of the class warfare struggle. The Green Hulk, the green skin on the witch, the green hair of Joker, the green beret of Luigi. Very consistent. The Red Hulk was played by Harrison Ford, born on 7/13, the day that Trump was shot. So both the Hulks have the birthday associated with the shooting of a president. And Harrison Ford in Captain America Brave New World, trailer was released on 7/12. Marvel Comic Universe changed the trailer because of what happened on 7/13, because in the trailer, Harrison Ford is at a podium as the president getting shot at, and he jumps to the ground like Trump did. And then you can add into it, in the movie, it's in a theater. His name is Ford Theater. It's like a Lincoln callback, if you ask me. But you have here this pattern. This is a reoccurring theme. These are both examples of concurrent programming. But he plays, okay, again, Harrison Ford becomes the Red Hulk. So the Red Hulk, if you ask me, could represent Trump in his final form, MAGA. And what happened after Trump was shot? Hulk Hogan in red, Hulk Hogan speaks at the RNC. And he talks about how looking up at Trump with the bloody head reminded him of being at Hulkamania, where his own head was bloodied and Trump was looking up at him. And then Trump blew a kiss at him. And I thought, oh, that's from one WWE Hall of Famer to the other. They both bladed themselves on TV. Of course, blading refers to the WWE technique of cutting yourself, little cuts, so you can bleed all over your face. All right, let's see here. Going through your comments. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We're getting close to the 3-hour mark. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. We did bring up the Nick thing. Nick Reiner, Nicholas Maduro, Renee, Nicole Good, Nick Shirley. What's up with all the Nicks? I don't know. But we're looking at clusters of symbols like the rage monkeys, the green, the names. These things are all very significant. I didn't get into what Synchromorpheus found with that actor. We'll get into that tomorrow. Jamarin says, how can any of this be real life? Remember as kids when we played outside with such awareness of the insanity that surrounds us? Yeah. Well, I guess, growing up, we were just uninformed. We weren't even misinformed because we found the misinformation boring. It's like adults get misinformed. So we were blissfully uninformed. And then we got informed. They darken us. And then some of us eventually get out of that and become informed. All right. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it as always. And I will be updating the archives. So if you're subscribed to Spotify, Patreon, or Substack, you get the archives to your inbox. If you're not a member, or on YouTube as well, you get it. If you're not a member, it's $2 a month at Spotify. If you don't want to contribute, that's not a problem. Your comments are good enough. We're just doing this for strategic reasons. It has to be done. For this think tank to do what it needs to do, this is a necessary step. But what I've done is at ips.monster, I have a 24-hour stream and it plays the latest. So if you're ever missing anything, just go to ips.monster and I am faithfully updating it